The Benjamin Franklin effect. There is a curious truth about human behavior that seems at first glance almost backward. It is known as the Benjamin Franklin effect, and it states that a person who has already done you a favor is more likely to do you another favor than someone you have helped. It turns the usual logic of kindness upside down. We tend to think that if we are good to others, they will like us more. But often, it is when others extend themselves on our behalf that their affection for us deepens. To understand this effect is to unlock a subtle but powerful key to human relationships, influence, and self-perception. The story behind the Benjamin Franklin effect traces back to Franklin himself. As a young legislator in Pennsylvania, he encountered a political rival who was particularly hostile toward him. Rather than confront or appease the man directly, Franklin employed a clever strategy. He asked the rival to lend him a rare and valuable book. The man, flattered by the request and eager to show his generosity, agreed. After Franklin returned the book with a gracious thank you, a curious transformation occurred. The rival, who once opposed Franklin fiercely, became his supporter and lifelong friend. This small act of lending a book had softened his animosity, replacing it with warmth and camaraderie. What happened here? Why would doing a favor for Franklin cause the rival to like him more? The answer lies deep within the workings of human psychology. When we do something for someone else, especially at their request, our minds seek to resolve any dissonance between our actions and our attitudes. If I have done you a favor, I reason, it must be because I like you. To preserve a coherent and positive self-image, I adjust my feelings to match my actions. In this way, behavior shapes emotion rather than the other way around. This phenomenon is rooted in the theory of cognitive dissonance, first explored by psychologist Leon Festinger. Cognitive dissonance occurs when our actions and beliefs are out of alignment, creating internal discomfort. The mind instinctively tries to resolve this tension by altering either our behavior or our beliefs. In the case of the Benjamin Franklin effect, the behavior, doing a favor, has already occurred. Thus, the belief, how I feel about you, must shift to align with my actions. Without realizing it, the act of helping creates a foundation for affection and loyalty. This insight has profound implications for how we navigate relationships, both personal and professional. Rather than working endlessly to impress others by showering them with favors, we may find it more effective to invite them to invest in us. By asking for assistance, thoughtfully and respectfully, we allow others to build a bridge toward us with their own hands. That bridge, built from their effort and goodwill, becomes stronger and more enduring than one constructed from our generosity alone. The Benjamin Franklin effect also reveals something surprising about influence. Many people believe that to gain favor, one must constantly give gifts, compliments, assistance. While kindness and generosity are important, they do not always create the emotional bonds we imagine they will. Sometimes, allowing someone else the opportunity to give to us fosters a deeper connection. It activates a sense of agency and investment. They see themselves as having chosen to be part of our story, rather than being the passive recipients of our efforts. This effect also operates quietly in the background of everyday life. Think about friendships that have deepened after a simple request for help, a ride to the airport, assistance with a move, advice during a difficult time. In making ourselves vulnerable enough to ask, we invite others into a position of strength and trust, and in rising to that occasion, they often find their feelings toward us warming in ways they could not have anticipated. Yet, the Benjamin Franklin effect is not about manipulation. It is not a cynical trick to control others' emotions. Rather, it reflects a deeper truth about how connection is built. True bonds are formed through mutual investment, shared vulnerability, and the delicate weaving together of favors, trust, and time. By recognizing this dynamic, we can foster more authentic, resilient relationships, not by giving endlessly, but by allowing others the dignity of giving as well. Interestingly, This effect extends beyond individual interactions. It can shape group dynamics, workplace cultures, and even political movements. When people are asked to contribute, to sacrifice, to step forward and help, they often become more committed to the cause they are serving. Their investment deepens their loyalty. They see themselves not just as supporters, but as participants, co-creators of a shared vision. Movements that invite action rather than passive support tend to forge stronger, more passionate communities. The Benjamin Franklin effect also offers insight into self-perception. When we act kindly towards someone else, we are not just shaping how we feel about them, we are shaping how we feel about ourselves. Each act of kindness, each favor granted, reinforces the story we tell ourselves about who we are. We see ourselves as generous, capable, and connected. In this way, doing favors not only binds us to others, but strengthens our own sense of identity and worth. At its heart, the Benjamin Franklin effect is a quiet reminder of the power of action over intention. Feelings follow deeds. Connection follows risk. Affection follows investment. In a world where it is easy to focus on appearances and performances, this effect calls us back to the basics of human nature. It reminds us that the surest way to deepen bonds is not to dazzle or dominate, but to invite and involve. There is also a profound humility embedded in this phenomenon. To ask for help requires admitting that we cannot do everything alone. It asks us to relinquish a little pride, to trust that others will respond with generosity rather than judgment. And in doing so, we give them a gift, the opportunity to rise to kindness, to prove their better nature not just to us, but to themselves. The Benjamin Franklin effect invites us to rethink the dynamics of giving and receiving. It suggests that strength is not always shown by giving endlessly, but sometimes by asking wisely. It proposes that vulnerability, far from being a weakness, can be the very soil in which loyalty and affection grow strongest. And it challenges the modern myth of self-sufficiency, reminding us that we are all builders of each other's lives. In an age where connection often feels shallow, where relationships flicker and fade with the swipe of a screen, the wisdom of this effect is more relevant than ever. It reminds us that depth comes from engagement, from the humble and human acts of asking, helping, and being helped. It suggests that the most enduring bonds are not formed by grand gestures, but by small moments of shared investment, repeated over time. So the next time you wish to strengthen a relationship, consider not what you can give, but what you might invite. Ask for advice, request a favor, seek a hand in something meaningful, not because you wish to manipulate or burden, but because you understand that true connection is a two-way street, paved not just with generosity, but with mutual trust and participation. The Benjamin Franklin effect teaches us that relationships are not built solely by impressing others with our strength, but by allowing space for their strength to emerge. It shows us that people often grow fond of those they have helped, precisely because helping weaves them into the fabric of each other's stories. And it reminds us that affection, loyalty, and love are not commodities to be earned or bought. They are gifts that arise naturally when we walk the delicate, beautiful path of human interdependence. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Benjamin Franklin effect is this: we like those we invest in because they become, in small but significant ways, extensions of ourselves. When we help someone, we do not just offer them our support, we offer them a place in our hearts. And that, it turns out, is the most enduring favor of all. The foot in the door technique. There is a subtle art to persuasion, one that operates quietly beneath the surface of our interactions. Among the many strategies used to influence behavior, few are as elegant and effective as the foot in the door technique. At its core, it is simple. Begin with a small request that is easy to agree to, and once compliance is secured, follow up with a larger, related request. This gradual escalation taps into powerful psychological forces, making people far more likely to agree to things they might have otherwise refused. To understand the foot-in-the-door technique is to glimpse a fundamental truth about how commitment shapes our actions and identity. The origins of this technique can be traced back to classic social psychology experiments in the 1960s. Researchers Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser conducted a study that illustrated the astonishing power of this approach. In one experiment, they called homeowners and asked them to agree to a small request, placing a tiny sign in their window supporting safe driving. A few days later, they returned with a much larger request. Could the homeowners install an enormous billboard on their lawn promoting road safety? Astonishingly, those who had agreed to the small sign were far more likely to agree to the large intrusive billboard than those who had been asked outright. A simple, seemingly inconsequential commitment had paved the way for a much bigger concession. But why does this technique work so well? The answer lies in the way humans strive for internal consistency. Once we agree to something, even something small, we begin to see ourselves as the kind of person who supports that cause or acts in that manner. Our behavior begins to shape our self-image, and our self-image, in turn, influences future behavior. Saying yes to a small request is not just an isolated act. It is the beginning of a story we tell ourselves about who we are, and once that story is in motion, we are motivated to behave in ways that are consistent with it. This desire for consistency is a deeply rooted aspect of human psychology. We like to think of ourselves as rational, coherent individuals whose actions align with our beliefs. When our actions and beliefs are out of sync, it creates a tension known as cognitive dissonance. To reduce this discomfort, we adjust our beliefs or future behaviors to match what we have already done. In the context of the foot-in-the-door technique, a small act of compliance leads to a subtle but significant shift in self-perception. Having said yes once, we are more likely to say yes again, especially if the second request feels connected to the first. Another reason the foot-in-the-door technique is so effective is because it builds a sense of momentum. Small steps lead naturally to larger ones. Once we are moving in a particular direction, it feels easier to continue than to stop and reverse course. Just as a single push can set a heavy object rolling down a hill, a small agreement can set in motion a chain of further compliances. The initial commitment acts like an open door, and once we have stepped through it, we are much more likely to keep walking forward. This technique is not limited to academic experiments. It permeates everyday life. Salespeople use it masterfully. A store clerk might ask if you would like to try a free sample. Once you accept, they may suggest purchasing a full-size product. Charities often begin by asking for a small donation or petition signature before requesting larger contributions. Even personal relationships are influenced by this dynamic. A friend may ask for a small favor, borrowing a book, for example, and later feel more comfortable asking for a bigger one, like help moving apartments. The pattern is everywhere, shaping our decisions often without us even realizing it. Importantly, the effectiveness of the foot-in-the-door technique depends on the nature of the initial request. It must be small enough to be non-threatening and easy to agree to, but meaningful enough to create a sense of commitment. If the first step feels trivial or insincere, it may not generate the psychological shift needed to support further compliance. The art lies in choosing a first request that feels natural, aligned with the person's values or self-image, and modest enough to invite an easy yes. Timing also plays a role. There needs to be a short but respectful interval between the small request and the larger one. If the larger request follows too quickly, it may feel manipulative and trigger resistance. If too much time passes, the sense of connection between the two requests may weaken. A well-timed escalation maintains the momentum of commitment without arousing suspicion or defensiveness. But the foot-in-the-door technique is not just a tool for manipulation. When used ethically, it can foster genuine engagement, empowerment, and cooperation. For example, educators might use it to encourage student participation. By first asking students to answer a simple question, teachers can build their confidence and willingness to tackle more challenging problems. Similarly, community organizers may invite people to attend a brief meeting before asking them to take on leadership roles. In these cases, the technique helps people gradually step into greater involvement and responsibility, building capacity and commitment along the way. There is also a deep lesson here about personal growth. We often imagine change as a dramatic leap, a sudden transformation. But real, lasting change usually begins with small steps. By making one small commitment to exercise for 5 minutes a day, to write a single paragraph, to have one difficult conversation, we open the door to larger transformation. The foot in the door technique mirrors the way change often unfolds within us. Gradually, step by step, as small actions reshape our self-image and expand our possibilities. Understanding this technique also helps protect us from being unwittingly influenced. By recognizing when small requests are being used to pave the way for larger ones, we can pause and reflect before committing further. It reminds us to ask, is this something I truly want to do, or am I simply following the path of least resistance? Awareness empowers us to make choices that are truly aligned with our values and goals, rather than being swept along by the momentum of earlier decisions. Yet it is important to acknowledge that influence, in itself, is not inherently good or bad. Influence is a natural part of human interaction. We are always affecting and being affected by those around us. What matters is the intention behind the influence. Are we guiding others toward actions that serve their highest good? Are we respecting their autonomy and dignity? When the foot in the door technique is used with integrity, it can be a powerful force for positive change. The technique also highlights the role of trust in human relationships. Compliance to the second request often depends on the sense of trust built during the first interaction. If the initial experience feels positive, respectful, and affirming, it lays a foundation for further cooperation. But if the first request feels deceptive or manipulative, it can backfire, eroding trust and closing the door to future engagement. Thus, sincerity and respect are essential to the ethical and effective use of this approach. At a deeper level, the foot in the door technique reveals how identity is shaped not only by grand intentions, but by small, repeated actions. Each choice we make, even the seemingly insignificant ones, reinforces a sense of who we are. When we act generously, we start to see ourselves as generous. When we act bravely, we start to believe in our own courage. The small doors we step through today become the hallways of character we inhabit tomorrow. In the realm of persuasion, the foot in the door technique remains one of the most quietly powerful strategies. It bypasses the need for forceful argument or coercion, instead inviting people to walk willingly into greater commitments. It works with human nature, not against it, honoring our need for consistency and our desire to see ourselves in a positive light, and in doing so, it offers a reminder that influence, at its best, is about guiding rather than pushing, inviting rather than demanding. The foot in the door technique teaches us something profound about the nature of change, both in ourselves and in others. Big transformations rarely begin with big actions. They begin with small steps so small they might seem almost insignificant at first. But taken together, these steps build momentum, reshape self-perception, and open the door to possibilities far greater than we might have dared to imagine. The foot in the door becomes a doorway to growth, connection, and transformation, one small step at a time. The door in the face technique. In the quiet dance of human persuasion, there is a technique that works not by small beginnings, but by grand openings. It is known as the door in the face technique, a method that seems at first almost too blunt to be effective, yet paradoxically, it is the boldness of the approach that grants it its power. The door in the face technique operates by asking for a large favor first, one that is likely to be refused, and then following up with a much smaller request. In doing so, the second request appears modest, reasonable, and fair by comparison, greatly increasing the chances that it will be accepted. Beneath this simple strategy lies a deep well of psychological dynamics involving contrast, guilt, and the innate human desire for reciprocity. The origins of the door-in-the-face technique can be traced to social psychology experiments in the 1970s, particularly the work of Robert Cialdini. In one landmark study, researchers approached college students with an outrageous request. Would they be willing to volunteer 2 hours a week to counsel juvenile delinquents for 2 years? As expected, nearly everyone refused, but then the experimenters made a second, much smaller request. Would the students be willing to chaperone a group of juveniles on a single afternoon trip to the zoo? Astonishingly, a significant percentage agreed to the second request, far more than if they had been asked only the smaller favor from the outset. The initial refusal, rather than closing the door, had set the stage for a willing acceptance. At the heart of this technique is the principle of contrast. Human perception is not absolute, it is comparative. When we evaluate a request or an offer, we often judge it not by its intrinsic qualities, but by how it stands relative to what came before. A request to spend a few hours chaperoning troubled youth might seem burdensome on its own, but when it follows a request for a 2-year commitment, it feels refreshingly light, almost trivial by comparison. The stark contrast between the two requests makes the second seem far more palatable than it otherwise would. But the door-in-the-face technique does not rely on contrast alone. It also taps into the powerful social norm of reciprocity. When someone makes a concession, when they step down from a large request to a smaller one, we feel a subtle but strong obligation to meet them halfway. It feels as though they have compromised for our sake, and fairness demands that we respond with a compromise of our own. This impulse is not the result of manipulation. It is a fundamental aspect of social cohesion, a mechanism that helps societies function by encouraging cooperation and mutual respect. There is also a subtle undercurrent of guilt at work. When we refuse a large request, we may feel a twinge of discomfort, a sense that we have let someone down or failed to live up to a standard of kindness. When the second, smaller request is presented, it offers a way to redeem ourselves, to restore a sense of balance and goodwill. Saying yes to the smaller favor alleviates the discomfort of having said no to the larger one. In this way, the door-in-the-face technique appeals not only to logic, but to the emotional fabric of human interaction. This strategy is not confined to psychology laboratories. It plays out constantly in everyday life. Fundraisers often begin by asking for large donations, knowing that many will decline, but will then be more receptive to a smaller contribution. Negotiators may start with high demands, expecting them to be rejected, before offering more moderate terms that feel reasonable by comparison. Even in personal relationships, a teenager might first ask for an extravagant privilege, like an unsupervised weekend trip, only to fall back to a more modest request, such as staying out late one evening, that now seems much more acceptable to wary parents. However, the effectiveness of the door-in-the-face technique depends critically on the relationship between the first and second requests. The two must be connected in theme or spirit. A request to donate a large sum to a charity, followed by a request to volunteer a few hours of time, makes sense. But if the second request is unrelated, if after refusing to buy an expensive painting someone is asked to sign a petition about traffic laws, the connection is lost, and the psychological levers that drive compliance no longer engage. Timing is also crucial. The second request must follow the first quickly enough that the sense of negotiation and concession remains alive. If too much time passes between the two requests, the psychological link weakens, and the opportunity slips away. The technique thrives on the immediacy of contrast and the lingering desire to reciprocate a perceived concession. Importantly, like any tool of influence, the door-in-the-face technique can be used ethically or manipulatively. When used with sincerity, when the initial large request reflects a genuine need or desire, the technique respects the autonomy and dignity of the person being asked, But when the large request is cynically designed purely to engineer a sense of guilt or obligation, it risks undermining trust and authenticity. Ethical influence always seeks to honor the person, not merely to extract compliance. There is a deeper lesson in the door-in-the-face technique about human nature itself. We are not purely rational beings, calculating pros and cons in isolation. We are social creatures, deeply attuned to fairness, reciprocity, and the subtle cues of negotiation. We respond not only to the content of a request, but to its context, its emotional tone, and the perceived intentions behind it. Understanding these dynamics helps us become more thoughtful communicators and more mindful decision-makers. Interestingly, the door-in-the-face technique also mirrors patterns of internal negotiation and personal growth. When facing a daunting goal, we often experience an initial internal refusal. The mountain seems too high, the challenge too great. But if we can step back and reframe the goal into smaller, more manageable steps, we find ourselves saying yes to what once seemed impossible. In this sense, the technique is not just about persuading others, it reflects the way we persuade ourselves to move forward in the face of overwhelming tasks. Awareness of this technique also serves as a form of defense. Recognizing when we are being guided through a sequence of requests allows us to step back and evaluate each request on its own merits. We can pause and ask, am I saying yes because I genuinely agree, or because the contrast makes this seem easier? Am I responding to the merit of the request, or to a sense of obligation engineered by the negotiation? Such reflection strengthens our ability to make decisions that align with our true values and priorities. The door-in-the-face technique also teaches us about resilience in the face of rejection. When the initial large request is refused, it is not a failure but a strategic step toward success. This mindset has applications far beyond persuasion. It reminds us that rejection is not the end of the road, but part of the process. It shows us that persistence, creativity, and adaptability can turn a no into a yes, not through force, but through understanding and respect for the rhythms of human interaction. At a philosophical level, the door-in-the-face technique reveals the subtle dance between autonomy and influence. True influence respects freedom of choice while guiding perception and judgment through careful framing. It does not coerce or deceive, but works with the natural currents of human psychology. It acknowledges that people do not make decisions in a vacuum. They are shaped by contrast, reciprocity, emotion, and the need for social harmony. Ultimately, the door-in-the-face technique reminds us that influence is an art, not a science. It is about timing, context, empathy, and understanding the hidden forces that shape decisions. When used with integrity, it can foster cooperation, resolve conflict, and build bridges between people. When misused, it can erode trust and leave behind a residue of manipulation. In the grand mosaic of human interaction, the door-in-the-face technique is but one tile, yet it illuminates so much about who we are and how we move through the world. It teaches us that influence is not about overpowering others, but about understanding them. It reminds us that refusal and acceptance are not fixed points but fluid states, shaped by the way requests are framed and presented. And perhaps most importantly, it shows us that even when a door is slammed in our face, there remains another door waiting quietly to be opened, a door not to conquest, but to connection. Mirroring. In the silent language of human connection, words often play only a small role. Beneath the surface of conversation, an intricate ballet of subtle gestures, postures, and movements unfolds, conveying emotions, intentions, and trust without a single word being spoken. Among the most powerful techniques for building unconscious rapport is mirroring, the gentle art of subtly mimicking another person's body language. Though almost invisible when done well, mirroring can weave a bond of familiarity and trust between two people, making interactions feel effortless and genuine. It is a skill that draws upon deep, ancient parts of our psychology, offering a quiet but profound pathway to connection. At its simplest, mirroring involves reflecting another person's gestures, posture, tone, or even speech patterns during a conversation. If they cross their legs, you might cross yours a few moments later. If they lean forward with interest, you do the same. If their voice becomes softer or faster, yours subtly follows suit. This imitation is not meant to mock or exaggerate, but rather to gently harmonize with the rhythms of the other person. When done with authenticity and sensitivity, mirroring signals a deep, unconscious message. I am like you. I understand you. We are in sync. The roots of mirroring run deep into our evolutionary past. Human beings are social creatures, wired for connection. Long before the development of complex language, non-verbal cues were essential for survival. Recognizing friend from foe, signaling safety, building alliances, all these crucial tasks relied heavily on the ability to read and respond to subtle physical signals. Mirroring, as a form of unconscious imitation, likely served as a shortcut to creating social bonds. Even today, we find ourselves more comfortable with people who move, speak, and behave in ways similar to our own. Mirroring taps into this primal circuitry, fostering a sense of belonging and safety almost instantaneously. Psychologists have long studied the phenomenon of mirroring and its effects on human interaction. Research consistently shows that when people are mirrored during a conversation, they tend to like the person they are speaking with more. They describe the interaction as smoother, more comfortable, and more trusting. In one famous study, waiters who subtly mirrored their customers' orders, repeating them back in a similar tone or phrasing, received significantly larger tips than those who simply acknowledged the orders without mirroring. This simple act of reflection created a feeling of being heard, valued, and respected. But why does mirroring have such a powerful effect? Part of the answer lies in the concept of empathy. When we mirror someone, we signal on a deep, unconscious level that we are attuned to them. We are not merely hearing their words, we are feeling their experience. This nonverbal resonance fosters empathy, making the other person feel seen, understood, and accepted. It bypasses the rational mind and speaks directly to the emotional brain, where feelings of trust and affinity are born. Mirroring also activates what neuroscientists call the mirror neuron system. Discovered in the early 1990s, mirror neurons are brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that same action. They are believed to play a critical role in empathy, learning, and social understanding. When we subtly mimic another person's body language, we are, in a sense, tuning our own mirror neuron systems to theirs, creating a kind of neural resonance that deepens the connection between us. In practical terms, mastering the art of mirroring requires mindfulness, subtlety, and authenticity. It begins with paying close attention to the other person, not just to their words, but to their whole being. Notice how they sit, how they gesture, how their voice rises and falls. Rather than copying them exactly or immediately, allow your mirroring to be delayed by a few seconds and softened, as though you are naturally flowing into their rhythm rather than artificially imitating them. True mirroring feels organic, not mechanical. It is less about technique and more about genuinely tuning in to the other person's energy. It is also important to mirror with intention and respect. Forced or exaggerated mirroring can backfire, making the interaction feel unnatural or even manipulative. The goal is not to control or deceive, but to create a shared space of mutual understanding. When mirroring arises from a genuine desire to connect, it becomes almost invisible, felt rather than seen, enhancing the flow of conversation without drawing attention to itself. Mirroring can be especially powerful in situations where trust must be built quickly, such as in therapy, sales, negotiations, or conflict resolution. A therapist who mirrors a client's posture and tone creates a safe environment where the client feels understood without judgment. A negotiator who mirrors an opponent's gestures and pacing builds subtle rapport that can soften resistance and open the door to compromise. Even in everyday interactions, Meeting someone new, deepening a friendship, reconnecting with a loved one, mirroring can quietly nurture the seeds of trust and intimacy. However, mirroring is not a magic trick that guarantees instant connection. It is most effective when combined with other elements of authentic communication: active listening, empathy, curiosity, and presence. Mirroring works best as part of a broader attitude of openness and attunement, rather than as a standalone technique. It is a physical manifestation of an inner state, a state of genuinely valuing and aligning with another human being. There are also cultural nuances to consider. Body language, gestures, and personal space vary widely across cultures. What feels like friendly mirroring in one culture may be perceived as intrusive or disrespectful in another. Sensitivity to these differences is crucial. Mirroring must always be adapted to the unique context and individual, rather than applied blindly or uniformly. At a deeper level, mirroring reveals a profound truth about human connection. We are, at our core, creatures of resonance. We long to feel seen, understood, and joined by others. We are drawn to those who reflect something of ourselves back to us, not as a mirror of ego, but as a mirror of shared humanity. Mirroring reminds us that connection is not built solely through impressive words or dazzling ideas, but through the quiet, invisible dance of presence, attunement, and mutual respect. It is worth noting that mirroring can occur naturally when two people are deeply engaged with each other. Close friends, romantic partners, and even strangers who fall into deep conversation often find themselves unconsciously mirroring each other's postures, gestures, and expressions. This natural mirroring is a sign of rapport already established, but it can also be encouraged and enhanced through conscious awareness and subtle practice. Learning to mirror skillfully can also deepen our self-awareness. As we become more attuned to others' non-verbal signals, we also become more attuned to our own. We notice how our bodies, faces, and voices express our inner states, and how these expressions influence the people around us. We become more mindful of the invisible threads that weave our interactions together, creating a richer, more compassionate tapestry of communication. Mirroring also invites us to slow down and be fully present. In a world that often pulls our attention in 1,000 directions, the act of quietly tuning in to another person's physical and emotional cues requires and fosters mindfulness. It calls us out of our own thoughts and agendas and into the shared sacred space of true dialogue. In this way, mirroring is not just a technique for building rapport, it is a practice of presence, empathy, and human connection. When we mirror another with sincerity, we offer them a silent gift, the feeling of being truly met. We say without words, "I am with you, I am listening, I see you." And in a world where so many feel unseen and unheard, that simple gift can be profoundly healing. Mirroring is more than a tool of influence or a strategy for communication. It is an expression of one of the most beautiful aspects of being human: our capacity to connect, to resonate, and to create shared understanding. It reminds us that we are not isolated islands, but parts of a vast and intricate web of relationships, woven together not only by our words, but by our gestures, our rhythms, and our very presence. Mirroring is the invisible art of connection. It is the soft echo of empathy. And it is a gentle reminder that sometimes the most powerful way to say, "I understand you," is not with words at all, but with a silent, mirrored dance of the soul. The Pique Technique. In a world overflowing with noise and distraction, one of the greatest challenges in communication is capturing attention. Most requests, whether for time, money, or assistance, are met with automatic resistance. People are busy, wary, or simply uninterested. Yet nestled within the science of persuasion is a surprisingly simple but powerful method for breaking through that wall of inattention: the Pique Technique. At its core, the Pique Technique is about making an unusual, unexpected request. one that momentarily disrupts habitual patterns of refusal and sparks curiosity. By doing so, it dramatically increases the likelihood of compliance, not through pressure or force, but by slipping gently past the mind's defenses. Imagine a stranger on the street approaching you with a request for money. If they ask, "Can you spare some change?" you might instinctively brush them off, your mind already categorizing the request as familiar and dismissible. But if instead they ask, "Can you spare 37 cents?" something shifts. The oddly specific amount jars your expectations. It forces a brief moment of attention, a mental pause where curiosity awakens. Why 37 cents? What is it for? That flicker of wonder interrupts the automatic no, creating a small window where yes becomes more possible. The Pique technique was first explored in depth by social psychologists who found that unusual requests were significantly more successful than standard ones. In one study, researchers had Confederates ask pedestrians for spare change. When the request was for a typical amount like a quarter, compliance rates were modest. But when the request was for an unusual amount, like 17 or 37 cents, compliance jumped dramatically. The specificity captured attention and broke the habitual script, making people more likely to engage and ultimately to say yes. At the heart of the Pique technique lies the psychological principle of disruption. Human beings rely heavily on mental shortcuts, heuristics, to navigate the world efficiently. When faced with familiar stimuli, our brains often respond automatically without deep processing. A typical request is met with a typical refusal, almost as a reflex. But an unusual request interrupts the expected pattern, forcing the brain to switch from automatic to deliberate processing. This momentary disruption creates an opening where influence can occur. Curiosity pulls the listener in before resistance can fully form. Another reason the Pique technique works is because of the perception of thoughtfulness. A highly specific request suggests that the person asking has a legitimate, particular reason for their request. It feels more intentional, less random. When someone asks for exactly 47 cents rather than some change, it subtly communicates that they have a plan, a purpose, or a genuine need. This perceived legitimacy can lower skepticism and increase the desire to help. Moreover, unusual requests often trigger a desire to resolve cognitive dissonance. When faced with something that doesn't quite fit our expectations, we feel a small tension, a need to make sense of the discrepancy. One way to resolve that tension is to engage with the person making the request, to comply and move the interaction toward a quick, understandable conclusion. Saying yes becomes a way to satisfy not just social norms, but an internal drive for closure. The Pique technique is not limited to requests for money. It can be used in a wide range of contexts: marketing, fundraising, negotiations, social initiatives, even everyday conversations. A nonprofit organization seeking donations might ask for $19.47 instead of $20.00, creating a subtle sense of uniqueness and intentionality. A teacher asking for volunteers might request help for exactly 23 minutes instead of some time, making the commitment seem lighter and more manageable. A friend seeking advice might ask for just 3.5 minutes of your time, making it harder to refuse because of the precise, non-threatening nature of the request. Timing and delivery matter greatly in using the Pique technique effectively. The unusual request must be presented naturally, without drawing undue attention to its strangeness. If it seems forced or gimmicky, it can trigger suspicion rather than curiosity. The goal is to create a small ripple of interest, not a wave of confusion. Subtlety and sincerity are key. The unusual nature of the request should feel like a natural extension of the speaker's character or situation, not a theatrical ploy. It is also important to recognize that the Pique technique is not about tricking people. It is about respectfully engaging their attention in a world where attention is precious and often guarded. When used ethically, it invites people to reconsider their automatic responses, offering them a genuine choice rather than manipulating them into compliance. Ethical influence honors the autonomy of the listener while skillfully navigating the realities of human psychology. The Pique technique also reveals something profound about the human mind: the power of novelty. Novelty awakens awareness. It pulls us out of habitual patterns and invites us to experience the world with fresh eyes. In a way, the Pique technique is a microcosm of a larger truth: that change, growth, and connection often begin when we step just slightly outside the expected, the ordinary, and the comfortable. Mastering the Pique technique requires a blend of creativity, empathy, and timing. It invites us to think carefully about how we frame our requests, how we respect the mental space of others, and how we can create moments of genuine engagement. It asks us to be playful but purposeful, surprising but sincere. Interestingly, the Pique technique also parallels strategies used by artists, writers, and performers to captivate their audiences. A novel with an unusual first line, a painting with an unexpected color choice, a song with an odd but catchy rhythm, all use disruption and curiosity to draw people in. In this sense, the Pique technique is not merely a method of persuasion. It is part of the broader human art of communication, an art that thrives on the delicate balance between the familiar and the unexpected. The technique also holds lessons for personal growth. Just as unusual requests capture attention, so too can unusual choices awaken our own lives. Breaking out of routine, trying something new, asking different questions, these small disruptions can open doors to greater awareness, creativity, and fulfillment. The Pique technique reminds us that life's richest possibilities often lie just beyond the familiar, waiting for us to notice. At its deepest level, the Pique technique is a gentle celebration of curiosity, the spark that drives exploration, learning, and connection. When we pique someone's curiosity, we invite them into a shared moment of wonder. We create space for engagement that is genuine, not transactional. We remind each other, in small ways, that the world is still capable of surprising us, and that even the simplest interactions can hold a spark of the extraordinary. When practiced thoughtfully, the Pique technique can transform interactions that would otherwise fade into forgettable routines. It can turn a brief encounter into a moment of connection. It can transform a no into a yes, not through pressure, but through the quiet invitation to notice, to wonder, and to engage. In a noisy world, the Pique technique stands as a reminder that attention is a precious gift. It cannot be demanded, it must be earned. And often, all it takes to earn it is the courage to ask for 37 cents instead of a quarter. To dare to be a little different, a little unexpected, and a little more alive to the infinite possibilities hidden within each passing moment, the spotlight effect. There is a curious illusion that follows us through life, whispering in our ears during moments of awkwardness, self-doubt, or embarrassment. It is the sense that all eyes are upon us, that every stumble, every flaw, every small misstep is magnified under an unrelenting spotlight. This phenomenon is known as the spotlight effect. It describes the tendency to overestimate how much other people notice and remember our mistakes or shortcomings. The reality, however, is far more forgiving. People are not scrutinizing us nearly as much as we believe, for they are far too absorbed in their own lives, their own concerns, and their own insecurities. Understanding the spotlight effect can be liberating, allowing us to move through life with greater freedom, self-compassion, and peace. The term spotlight effect was coined by social psychologists Thomas Gilovich, Victoria Medvec, and Kenneth Savitsky in the year 2000. In a series of experiments, they demonstrated how individuals consistently overestimated the degree to which their actions and appearance were noticed by others. In one study, participants were asked to wear an embarrassing t-shirt into a room full of strangers. Afterwards, they estimated how many people had noticed the shirt. Consistently, participants believed that far more people had noticed and remembered the shirt than actually had. The spotlight, it turned out, was not nearly as glaring as they imagined. At the heart of the spotlight effect lies the simple truth that each of us is the protagonist of our own story. We are at the center of our own experiences, viewing the world through the lens of our own thoughts, feelings, and desires. Because we are so vividly aware of our own actions, it is easy to assume that others must be equally aware. But each person carries their own spotlight, their own internal monologue, their own preoccupation. In the vast theater of life, everyone is absorbed in their own role, paying only fleeting attention to the performances around them. This realization can be profoundly comforting. How often do we replay moments of perceived embarrassment in our minds? An awkward comment at a party, a stumble on a crowded street, a wardrobe malfunction. We imagine that these moments are seared into the memories of everyone who witnessed them. But the truth is, most people have already forgotten. Their attention quickly returned to their own lives, their own concerns, their own self-consciousness. What feels monumental to us often registers only faintly, if at all, in the minds of others. The spotlight effect also teaches us an important lesson about empathy. Just as we are preoccupied with our own worries and imperfections, so too is everyone else. Recognizing this shared human tendency can foster compassion, not only for ourselves but for others. When we remember that each person is grappling with their own fears and insecurities, we become less judgmental, less harsh, and more understanding. We realize that vulnerability is universal, and that the small mistakes that seem to loom so large in our minds are in truth part of the common fabric of human experience. Moreover, the spotlight effect invites us to release the heavy burden of perfectionism. Perfection is a myth, a shimmering mirage that recedes the closer we try to approach it. Striving for excellence can be noble, but when it is fueled by the fear of judgment, it becomes a trap. The fear of being seen as less than perfect can paralyze us, stifling creativity, joy, and authenticity. By remembering that others are not scrutinizing us as intensely as we fear, we can give ourselves permission to take risks, to speak freely, to stumble and rise again without shame. The understanding of the spotlight effect also empowers us to be more present. Anxiety about how we are perceived often pulls us out of the moment, anchoring us in self-consciousness and doubt. We become spectators to our own lives, constantly monitoring and evaluating ourselves through an imagined audience's eyes. But when we let go of the illusion that everyone is watching, we are free to immerse ourselves more fully in the here and now. We can listen more deeply, engage more authentically, and live more vibrantly, untethered from the weight of imagined judgment. Interestingly, the spotlight effect does not only apply to moments of embarrassment, it also colors our experiences of achievement and success. Just as we overestimate how much others notice our mistakes, we may also overestimate how much they notice our triumphs. A promotion, a new car, a public accolade, these events may feel world-shaking to us, but may register only faintly on the radars of those around us. This is not cause for dismay, but rather an invitation to find fulfillment not in external validation, but in internal satisfaction. When we recognize that others are less focused on us than we think, we can begin to live more for ourselves, aligning our actions with our own values and joys, rather than the imagined applause of the crowd. There is also a beautiful humility in embracing the spotlight effect. It reminds us that we are neither as grand nor as doomed as our egos might suggest. We are part of a vast, intricate tapestry of lives, each thread vibrant and important, but none overshadowing the whole. Our mistakes are not catastrophic events. They are fleeting ripples in a much larger ocean. Our moments of awkwardness are not defining. They are passing shadows on the ever-turning wheel of life. For those who struggle with social anxiety, the spotlight effect can be both a challenge and a balm. The fear of negative evaluation can feel overwhelming, but understanding the cognitive distortions at play can offer a pathway to healing. Cognitive behavioral strategies often encourage individuals to test their assumptions, asking, for instance, whether others truly noticed or cared about a perceived misstep. Time and again, the evidence reveals a gentler, more forgiving reality. Others are not nearly as focused on us as we fear. Their judgments are neither as harsh nor as enduring as our anxious minds suggest. Cultivating mindfulness can further ease the grip of the spotlight effect. Mindfulness teaches us to observe our thoughts without becoming entangled in them, to notice the arising of self-consciousness without letting it dominate our experience. When we feel the spotlight turn inward, we can gently remind ourselves, this too is just a thought. It is not reality. It is not the truth of how others see us. It is simply the echo of our own vivid self-awareness. The antidote to the spotlight effect lies in shifting our focus outward, not on how we are perceived, but on how we can connect, contribute, and be present with others. When we truly listen, when we offer kindness, when we engage with curiosity rather than self-monitoring, we dissolve the illusion of the spotlight. We move from being performers to participants, from being observed to being involved. There is a profound freedom in this shift. It allows us to show up more fully, to risk imperfection, to laugh at ourselves when we falter, and to celebrate our shared humanity. It teaches us that we do not need to be flawless to be loved, nor extraordinary to be valuable. We are enough as we are, with all our stumbles and shining moments alike. The spotlight effect reminds us of the quiet truth that we are not the center of everyone else's universe, and that is a blessing. It frees us from the tyranny of imagined judgment. It invites us to walk a little lighter, to forgive ourselves more readily, and to embrace the beautiful, messy imperfection of being human. Everyone is carrying their own spotlight, their own bundle of hopes, fears, and dreams. They are far too busy navigating their own path to scrutinize ours. And so we are free, not to be perfect, but to be real, not to impress, but to connect, not to perform, but to live. The spotlight was never as bright as we imagined, and stepping out of it, we discover the vast, welcoming space of a life truly lived. Anchoring bias. In the hidden chambers of decision-making, our minds often cling to the first piece of information we encounter, even when it is arbitrary or irrelevant. This phenomenon is known as anchoring bias. It is a subtle yet powerful influence that shapes our judgments, our choices, and even our beliefs without our full awareness. Anchoring bias occurs when an initial piece of information, the anchor, sets the tone for everything that follows. Whether it is the starting price in a negotiation, the first number mentioned in a conversation, or even an initial impression, the anchor exerts a gravitational pull on our thinking, coloring subsequent evaluations and decisions. Understanding this bias offers a profound glimpse into the workings of the human mind and reveals how easily our perceptions can be guided, sometimes without us even realizing it. The classic studies on anchoring bias were conducted by psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, pioneers in the field of behavioral economics. In one experiment, participants were asked to spin a rigged wheel of fortune that was designed to stop at either a low number or a high number. After spinning the wheel, they were asked to estimate the percentage of African countries that are members of the United Nations. Astonishingly, those who landed on a higher number gave significantly higher estimates than those who landed on a lower number. Even though the number on the wheel was clearly irrelevant, it still anchored their thinking. The initial figure, though random, planted itself like a seed in their minds and shaped their perceptions. Anchoring works because our brains are wired to use reference points when making decisions. Faced with uncertainty, we naturally grasp for something, anything, to guide us. The first piece of information we encounter becomes that guide, and we adjust our judgments around it, often insufficiently. This adjustment is typically partial, meaning we do not drift far from the anchor, even when we logically know it should not influence us. In this way, anchoring bias exploits both our need for cognitive shortcuts and our discomfort with uncertainty. One of the most common and practical examples of anchoring bias is found in price negotiations. Imagine you are shopping for a car. The dealer starts by quoting a high price, much higher than you expected. Even if you negotiate the price down, the final figure will likely be much closer to the original high price than it would have been otherwise. The initial number, however, inflated, sets a psychological frame. Your mind uses it as a starting point, and every subsequent negotiation feels like a movement around that anchor rather than a fresh, independent evaluation. Sellers know this instinctively, which is why starting offers are often set high, not because they expect you to pay that price, but because it anchors your expectations. Anchoring bias is not limited to numbers or prices. It permeates judgments about people, events, and possibilities. First impressions, for example, are a form of anchoring. The initial traits or behaviors we observe in someone set the foundation for how we perceive them going forward. If a person's first encounter with us is positive, we are more likely to interpret their future actions favorably. If the first impression is negative, it becomes an anchor that colors everything that follows, often unfairly. Understanding anchoring bias also sheds light on why it is so difficult to change people's minds once they have formed an initial belief. The first piece of information they receive, whether accurate or not, becomes the reference point. Subsequent facts or arguments are filtered through the lens of that initial anchor. Changing a deeply anchored belief often requires not just new information, but a complete reframing, a process that is both difficult and uncomfortable. Interestingly, anchoring bias can also work in our favor when used ethically and mindfully. In negotiations, for example, setting a favorable anchor can lead to better outcomes. In goal setting, starting with a bold or ambitious target can frame our efforts more expansively, pushing us to aim higher than we might have otherwise. In communication, presenting an idea within a strong, positive frame can shape how it is received and remembered. The key is to recognize the anchoring effect not as a form of manipulation, but as an acknowledgement of how human cognition naturally works. However, the power of anchoring bias also calls for caution. It reminds us that our judgments are more malleable than we often assume. It challenges the myth of the purely rational decision maker and invites humility about our own susceptibility to influence. Recognizing when anchors are at play allows us to pause, to step back, and to ask whether our evaluations are truly based on independent thought or are simply orbiting around an arbitrary starting point. One practical way to mitigate anchoring bias is to actively generate multiple perspectives before making a decision. Rather than accepting the first number, idea, or impression that presents itself, we can deliberately consider alternatives. In negotiations, this might mean doing independent research beforehand so that the seller's opening offer does not dominate our frame of reference. In forming opinions, it might involve seeking out diverse sources of information and reminding ourselves that the first narrative we encounter is not necessarily the complete story. Another strategy is to set our own anchors deliberately. If we are aware that the first figure mentioned will have an outsized impact, we can be proactive in establishing it ourselves. Setting an ambitious but reasonable goal, defining our own opening terms, or framing a conversation with a positive starting point gives us greater control over how the interaction unfolds. Rather than being pulled by someone else's anchor, we can plant our own flag and shape the landscape around it. Anchoring bias also teaches us about the importance of self-awareness. Often, the anchors that shape our judgments are not external, but internal, formed by past experiences, cultural norms, or subconscious expectations. Becoming aware of these internal anchors can help us question them, expand beyond them, and make choices that are more aligned with our true values and goals. It reminds us that freedom of thought requires not just access to information, but also vigilance against the subtle forces that shape perception. The power of anchors extends even to our self-perception. The beliefs we hold about ourselves, our abilities, our worth, our potential, are often anchored by early experiences, feedback, or comparisons. A single comment from a teacher, a single moment of success or failure, can become an anchor that defines how we see ourselves for years. Recognizing these internal anchors allows us to challenge them, to reframe our self-image, and to open ourselves to greater possibility. Anchoring bias reveals a paradox at the heart of human cognition. We seek certainty and guidance, yet the very tools we use to find them, our reliance on initial information, can lead us astray. We crave firm ground, yet the anchors we grasp for are often arbitrary, floating above shifting sands. Embracing this paradox with humility allows us to approach decisions and judgments with greater openness, curiosity, and resilience. Anchoring bias is not merely a cognitive flaw to be corrected. It is a reflection of our human need for structure in a complex, uncertain world. It reminds us that while we may never be completely free from the influence of anchors, we can learn to navigate them with greater skill and awareness. We can choose our anchors more wisely, question them more deeply, and recognize the vastness of possibility that lies beyond any single point of reference. Anchoring bias invites us to see decision-making not as a rigid process, but as a fluid journey, one that benefits from mindfulness, reflection, and a willingness to look beyond the first answer that presents itself. It challenges us to think more expansively, to judge more fairly, and to act more consciously. And in doing so, it offers not just better decisions, but a deeper understanding of ourselves and the hidden forces that guide our lives. The scarcity principle. Among the many forces that shape human behavior, few are as quietly persuasive, as deeply rooted in psychology, as the scarcity principle. It is the idea that people assign greater value to things that are perceived to be rare, fleeting, or in limited supply. When something becomes scarce, it suddenly feels more desirable, more precious, more worthy of pursuit. Whether it is a product, an opportunity, or even attention itself, scarcity taps into a primal part of human nature, the fear of missing out, and compels action often before reason has time to intervene. Understanding the scarcity principle provides profound insight not only into marketing and persuasion, but into the way we chase, cherish, and sometimes cling to the things we believe we cannot easily have. The roots of the scarcity principle lie deep within our evolutionary past. In times when resources were genuinely limited, when food, shelter, and safety could not be guaranteed, securing scarce resources often meant the difference between survival and extinction. Our ancestors who responded quickly and decisively to the presence of rare goods had a better chance of thriving. Over countless generations, the tendency to value scarcity became wired into our psychology. Even in today's world of abundance, that ancient programming still whispers to us, urging us to act before an opportunity slips away. One of the most common manifestations of the scarcity principle is seen in the world of marketing. Limited time offers, flash sales, only 2 left in stock banners, all of these strategies leverage the psychological urgency that scarcity creates. When we are told that a product is in short supply, we often feel a heightened desire for it, regardless of whether we truly need it. The fear of loss becomes more powerful than the hope of gain. It is not just that the item itself is valuable, it is that the chance to obtain it is slipping through our fingers, and that potential loss looms larger in our minds than the simple facts of the situation. Psychologist Robert Cialdini, in his foundational work on influence, identified scarcity as one of the key principles of persuasion. He observed that people are far more motivated to act by the possibility of losing something than by the possibility of gaining something of equal value. This phenomenon, known as loss aversion, intensifies the effects of scarcity. The thought of missing out triggers an emotional response, anxiety, urgency, desire, that often overrides rational deliberation. Scarcity short-circuits our careful thinking and pushes us towards swift, sometimes impulsive action. Scarcity does not only influence what we buy, it also shapes how we value experiences, relationships, and opportunities. An invitation to an exclusive event feels more special because it is limited. A relationship can feel more intense when it seems precarious or fleeting. Even ideas and information can seem more compelling when they are hidden, forbidden, or restricted. The very act of withholding, can imbue something with a mysterious allure. We do not merely want what is rare. We believe it must be better precisely because it is harder to obtain. However, the power of the scarcity principle depends heavily on perception. It is not always about actual scarcity, but about perceived scarcity. Marketers and influencers understand this well, creating the appearance of limited supply through phrases like "act now" or "while supplies last" can trigger the same urgency as genuine scarcity. The mind reacts not to the objective reality, but to the emotional impression that time or opportunity is running out. This raises important ethical considerations. Scarcity can be used responsibly to genuinely alert people to limited opportunities or resources. But it can also be exploited, creating artificial pressure that manipulates people into decisions they might not otherwise make. Understanding the scarcity principle helps us become wiser consumers and more mindful decision makers. It invites us to pause, to step back from the emotional urgency, and to ask, is this really as scarce, as urgent as it appears? Or am I being nudged by forces that seek to bypass my better judgment? Interestingly, the scarcity principle can also operate in reverse. Sometimes, abundance can diminish value. When something is readily available, we often take it for granted, no matter how valuable it might truly be. Relationships, opportunities, even personal talents can be overlooked simply because they are always within reach. Scarcity, or the threat of it, forces us to pay attention, to recognize and appreciate what we might otherwise neglect. It shines a spotlight on what matters, precisely because it reminds us that it could be lost. In relationships, for example, absence can indeed make the heart grow fonder. When a loved one is away, when time together is limited, the moments we share feel more vivid, more significant. Scarcity heightens appreciation, it sharpens focus, it teaches us to treasure what might otherwise fade into the background of our busy lives. Yet it also reminds us of a bittersweet truth, that part of what makes something precious is its impermanence. In the broader sense, the scarcity principle speaks to a fundamental tension in human life, the tension between abundance and loss. We long for stability, security, and plenty, yet it is often the fleeting, the rare, and the uncertain that most deeply move us. A sunset, a child's first steps, a once-in-a-lifetime adventure, these moments are powerful because they are ephemeral. Their scarcity carves them into our memories, etching them with emotion that permanence could never evoke. This understanding can inspire us to live more mindfully. Rather than chasing endlessly after what is marketed as scarce, we can turn our attention to the naturally rare gifts of life, the fleeting conversations, the spontaneous laughter, the transient seasons of growth and change. By recognizing the scarcity inherent in everyday moments, we cultivate gratitude. We learn to cherish not because something is advertised as rare, but because we see clearly that everything, in some sense, is fleeting and therefore precious. At the same time, awareness of the scarcity principle empowers us to resist being manipulated by artificial scarcity. It allows us to distinguish between true opportunities that deserve our swift action and manufactured urgency designed to pressure us. It gives us the clarity to recognize when we are being influenced and the strength to pause, breathe, and choose deliberately rather than react impulsively. The scarcity principle also offers insights into leadership and motivation. Leaders who understand scarcity can inspire action by framing opportunities as limited, precious, and timely. A mentor might emphasize the unique value of a moment of learning. A coach might highlight the rarity of a particular chance to excel. Scarcity, when used authentically, can galvanize people to rise to the occasion, to seize moments that they might otherwise let pass by unnoticed. However, the most profound application of the scarcity principle may lie in how we view our own lives. Time itself is the ultimate scarce resource. No matter how much we seek to stretch or save it, time slips steadily away. Each day, each hour, each breath is a one-time gift. Recognizing this, not in a spirit of fear, but of reverence, awakens us to the sacredness of living. It reminds us not to waste our days in trivial pursuits or hollow distractions, but to invest our attention, our energy, and our love in what truly matters. The scarcity principle is not merely a tool of persuasion. It is a mirror reflecting deep truths about human existence. It shows us that value is not inherent. It is conferred by our attention, our awareness, and our appreciation. It teaches us that what is most precious is often what is most fleeting, and it invites us, gently but urgently, to live with greater gratitude, greater presence, and greater joy. The next time you feel the pull of urgency, whether in a sale, a decision, or a passing moment, pause and listen. Is this scarcity real or manufactured? Is this something you truly value or something you are being urged to value? And above all, ask yourself, what in this precious, fleeting life do I not want to miss? For in recognizing the reality of scarcity, we do not become frantic or fearful. We become awake, we become grateful, and we step more fully into the luminous, limited, extraordinary gift of now, the illusion of choice. In the vast landscape of human decision-making, freedom and autonomy are cherished ideals. We like to believe that our choices are entirely our own, guided purely by independent thought and authentic desire. Yet, beneath the surface, the mechanics of influence often tell a different story. One of the most quietly powerful techniques for guiding behavior is known as the illusion of choice. By presenting 2 or 3 carefully selected options, all of which are acceptable to the person offering them, it becomes possible to lead others toward a desired outcome while allowing them to feel a full sense of control. This strategy is not about force or deception. Rather, it is about understanding the profound importance of autonomy in human psychology and gently shaping choices in a way that honors that need, while guiding decisions toward mutually beneficial ends. The essence of the illusion of choice lies in the paradox that choice itself, even when constrained, fosters satisfaction and compliance. When people feel that they have agency, that they are selecting freely among alternatives, they are more likely to engage willingly, to commit deeply, and to remain satisfied with their decisions afterward. Conversely, when they feel pressured, cornered, or coerced, even the best outcomes can leave a bitter aftertaste of resentment. The secret then is not to strip away choice, but to frame it carefully, offering options that lead naturally toward the desired destination. Consider a simple example from everyday life. A parent trying to get a child to eat vegetables might ask, "Would you like carrots or peas with your dinner?" Rather than demanding that the child eat vegetables outright, the parent offers a limited set of choices. The child feels empowered, involved in the decision, and more likely to comply willingly. Yet both options satisfy the parent's original goal. The child's sense of agency is preserved, even though the ultimate outcome, eating vegetables, was subtly directed from the start. This technique is not limited to parenting. Salespeople often use it with great success. Rather than asking, "Would you like to buy this product?" which invites a yes or no response, they might ask, "Would you prefer the standard package or the premium one?" Both options involve making a purchase, yet the customer feels in command of the decision. In negotiations, offering 2 acceptable settlement terms rather than a single demand fosters a spirit of cooperation. In leadership, presenting a team with 2 or 3 strategic directions allows them to feel ownership over the plan, even if all paths lead where the leader intends. The illusion of choice works because it respects a fundamental truth of human psychology. People value autonomy. They resist being told what to do, but they embrace being given the opportunity to choose. Even when the range of choices is limited, the act of choosing satisfies the deep desire for self-direction. It reinforces the belief that we are agents of our own fate, not pawns in someone else's game. Moreover, offering a few curated options reduces decision fatigue. Faced with too many possibilities, people can become overwhelmed, paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice. By narrowing the field to a manageable number of attractive alternatives, the illusion of choice eases the cognitive burden, making decision-making smoother and more satisfying. It strikes a balance between freedom and structure, offering enough autonomy to empower without so much as to overwhelm. Yet it is important to recognize that the illusion of choice carries ethical responsibilities. When used thoughtfully and transparently, it can foster collaboration, efficiency, and mutual satisfaction. But when used manipulatively, offering false choices that conceal hidden agendas, it can erode trust and damage relationships. True mastery of this technique lies not in trickery, but in aligning the available choices with the genuine interests and well-being of those involved. Ethical influence honors the dignity of the individual while guiding choices toward constructive outcomes. The illusion of choice also sheds light on the subtle architecture of many aspects of modern life. Menus, websites, contracts, political platforms, all are often carefully designed to guide decisions while preserving the appearance of autonomy. We are constantly navigating environments shaped by invisible hands, steering us towards certain behaviors without overtly restricting our freedom. Understanding this dynamic empowers us to make more conscious choices, to pause and ask, are these the only options? Are these the best options? What else might be possible? At a deeper level, the illusion of choice invites reflection on the nature of freedom itself. Is freedom simply the presence of options, or is it the quality and authenticity of those options? Are we truly free when our choices are subtly framed by others, even if we feel autonomous in making them? These questions challenge us to look beyond the surface of decision-making, to examine the structures and influences that shape our lives, and to cultivate a deeper, more mindful kind of freedom. In personal relationships, the illusion of choice can be a powerful tool for building harmony and cooperation. Offering choices rather than issuing commands invites participation rather than resistance. It transforms interactions from power struggles into partnerships. Whether it is deciding where to eat, how to spend an afternoon, or how to solve a conflict, framing discussions around options rather than ultimatums fosters goodwill and mutual respect. In leadership and management, the same principle applies. Employees who are given meaningful choices about their work, how to structure their time, which projects to pursue, how to solve problems, are more engaged, motivated, and loyal. Even when the range of choices is constrained by organizational needs, the act of choosing fosters a sense of ownership and investment. Leaders who understand the illusion of choice are able to guide their teams effectively without resorting to heavy-handed control. The power of this technique also reveals something fundamental about human motivation. People are far more committed to decisions they feel they have made themselves. Compliance is not enough. Engagement matters. When people choose, they invest themselves. They defend their decisions, persevere through challenges, and find deeper satisfaction in the outcomes. The illusion of choice taps into this motivational engine not by removing freedom, but by channeling it. Yet the most profound lesson of the illusion of choice may be internal. Often, we are faced with choices that seem limited, framed by circumstances shaped by external forces. Recognizing the framing allows us to step back and ask deeper questions. What do I truly want? What choices have I not yet seen? Where is my real power in this situation? True freedom lies not merely in selecting among offered options, but in imagining new possibilities, reframing problems, and sometimes creating choices where none were given. Understanding the illusion of choice also fosters humility. It reminds us that our own decision-making is influenced by framing, context, and subtle guidance more than we like to admit. It invites us to be gentle with ourselves and others, recognizing that the human mind seeks simplicity, closure, and autonomy, sometimes at the expense of deeper reflection. Awareness is not a cure for bias, but it is a beginning, a step toward more thoughtful, deliberate living. When used wisely, the illusion of choice is not manipulation, it is collaboration. It is the art of guiding without coercing, influencing without imposing, partnering rather than commanding. It honors the human need for agency while acknowledging the realities of influence that weave through every social interaction. It invites a more respectful, creative, and ethical approach to leadership, negotiation, parenting, teaching, and everyday conversation. The illusion of choice is a reminder that freedom is not simply about having infinite options. It is about having meaningful, empowering options. Choices that align with our values, that respect our dignity, and that invite our full engagement. It teaches us that influence, at its best, is not about stripping away autonomy, but about offering paths where autonomy can thrive. And perhaps most beautifully, it reminds us that even when choices are framed, even when paths are gently suggested, the soul remains free. We choose not merely among the options we are given, but in how we approach them, in the spirit with which we live, in the dreams we dare to imagine, and in the courage we bring to every moment of decision. True freedom is not just about what we choose, but about how we choose. And that is a choice that no one else can make for us. The Zeigarnik effect. There is a subtle tension that lingers in the mind, an invisible thread that tugs at our awareness whenever something remains incomplete. This phenomenon, known as the Zeigarnik effect, reveals a fascinating truth about human psychology. We remember unfinished or interrupted tasks far more vividly than those we have completed. Named after the psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who first observed it in the 1920s, the Zeigarnik effect illuminates how incompleteness captures attention, lodges itself in memory, and influences our emotions, thoughts, and behaviors long after the moment has passed. Understanding this effect offers profound insights into how to make ideas stick, how to foster motivation, and how to navigate the unfinished business that quietly shapes our inner lives. The story behind the discovery of the Zeigarnik effect is itself a reflection of its power. While sitting in a bustling cafe in Vienna, Zeigarnik noticed that waiters seemed to remember complex food orders with remarkable precision until the orders were delivered and completed. Once the transaction was finished, the details seemed to vanish from memory almost immediately. Intrigued, she conducted experiments in which participants were asked to perform a series of simple tasks, such as solving puzzles or assembling objects. Some tasks were interrupted midway, preventing completion. When later asked to recall the tasks, participants consistently remembered the interrupted ones better than the completed ones. It was as if the mind, dissatisfied with unfinished business, held on tighter, refusing to let go. At the heart of the Zeigarnik effect lies a fundamental principle of cognitive tension. When a task is left incomplete, it creates a kind of mental discomfort, a sense of unresolved tension that the mind seeks to resolve. Completion brings closure and peace, allowing the mind to release its grip, but incompletion leaves a crack open, a cognitive itch that demands attention. This tension ensures that the unfinished task remains active in our awareness, floating near the surface of consciousness, ready to be recalled more easily than tasks that have been fully resolved and filed away. The phenomenon has far-reaching implications for learning, memory, and communication. Teachers, writers, and marketers often use the Zeigarnik effect deliberately to enhance engagement and retention. Cliffhangers at the end of a chapter, open-ended questions during a lesson, or suspenseful pauses in a speech all create a sense of incompletion that draws the audience forward. When an idea or narrative is left hanging, the mind clings to it, turning it over, seeking closure. In this way, strategic interruption can make information more memorable and ideas more impactful. The Zeigarnik effect also plays a significant role in motivation. Unfinished goals continue to exert psychological pressure, pulling at our attention and prompting us to take action. This explains why to-do lists can be both motivating and anxiety-inducing. Each unchecked item represents an open loop, a source of cognitive tension that demands resolution. Completing tasks brings a sense of relief and satisfaction, but until then, the unfinished work hums quietly in the background of our thoughts, nudging us toward completion. However, The Zeigarnik effect is a double-edged sword. While it can drive productivity and memory, it can also contribute to stress and rumination. When too many tasks remain unfinished, the cumulative cognitive tension can become overwhelming. The mind becomes cluttered with unresolved threads, each tugging for attention, leading to anxiety, distraction, and fatigue. In such cases, it becomes essential to manage the open loops consciously, to prioritize, to set clear goals, and to create pathways to closure. Understanding the Zeigarnik effect also sheds light on why certain experiences linger in our minds long after they have ended. A conversation left unresolved, a dream unfulfilled, a conflict left without reconciliation. These incomplete emotional tasks can echo through our thoughts far more persistently than completed ones. Closure, whether cognitive or emotional, allows the mind to let go. Incompletion, by contrast, keeps the door slightly ajar, inviting repeated visits from memory and emotion. In the world of persuasion and storytelling, the Zeigarnik effect can be a powerful ally. A speaker might pose a provocative question at the beginning of a talk, delaying the answer until later, ensuring that the audience remains mentally engaged. A writer might end a chapter on a note of suspense, compelling the reader to turn the page. Advertisers might hint at a solution without revealing it fully, prompting viewers to seek more information. Each of these techniques leverages the mind's natural inclination to seek resolution, using incompletion as a magnet for attention and memory. Yet the power of the Zeigarnik effect is not merely tactical, it also reveals something profound about human nature. We are creatures of purpose, driven by a deep-seated need for completion and coherence. Open loops, whether intellectual, emotional, or practical, disturb our equilibrium. They awaken curiosity, propel action, and shape the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what matters most. In this way, the tension of incompletion is not just a quirk of memory. It is a vital force that moves us forward, a reminder that to be human is to live in a state of ongoing creation and becoming. Harnessing the Zeigarnik effect in everyday life involves cultivating awareness of our open loops and using them wisely. It means recognizing when an unfinished task is a source of productive motivation and when it has become a source of unhealthy stress. It means being deliberate about how we structure our goals, our communications, and our learning experiences, using strategic incompletion to enhance engagement while ensuring that pathways to closure remain clear and attainable. One practical application is in the way we approach complex tasks. Breaking large projects into smaller, manageable steps creates a series of mini tensions and mini resolutions, keeping motivation alive while preventing overwhelm. Each small completion satisfies the mind's need for closure, providing momentum for the next step. Similarly, when learning new information, periodically pausing to pose questions or create gaps in understanding can enhance retention by activating the Zeigarnik effect. The phenomenon also invites us to reflect on the importance of closure in our emotional lives. Unfinished conversations, unresolved conflicts, and unexpressed feelings can linger painfully, occupying mental and emotional space long after the original events. Seeking closure through dialogue, forgiveness, or personal reflection can free the mind from the persistent pull of incompletion, allowing healing and peace to emerge. In leadership and collaboration, understanding the Zeigarnik effect can improve communication and project management. Leaders who articulate clear next steps and provide timely resolutions help their teams avoid the paralyzing effects of unresolved tasks. Teams that understand the importance of closure can maintain higher levels of focus, morale, and cohesion. At a broader philosophical level, the Zeigarnik effect reminds us that life itself is a series of open loops. We are always in the middle of stories, journeys, and transformations. There will always be tasks unfinished, dreams incomplete, questions unanswered. Accepting this reality with grace allows us to live with greater patience, resilience, and openness. We can honor the tension of incompletion not as a flaw, but but as a vital sign of growth and engagement with the unfolding mystery of existence. The Zeigarnik effect teaches us that incompletion is not merely a cognitive phenomenon, it is a fundamental aspect of the human experience. It is the whisper that calls us to continue, the tug that keeps us moving, the persistent heartbeat of curiosity and desire. By understanding and embracing this dynamic, we can use it to foster memory, motivation, creativity, and healing. We can live more intentionally, navigating the dance between closure and openness with wisdom and grace. And so, when you find a task unfinished, a question unanswered, a dream deferred, remember, it is not merely a burden to be hurriedly resolved. It is an invitation to engage more deeply, to move more consciously, and to live more fully within the beautiful tension of a life forever unfolding. The fear then relief technique. Within the subtle art of human influence, there are few techniques as quietly powerful as the fear then relief technique. It is a method that works not by direct persuasion, but by guiding emotional states, inducing a momentary spike of fear or tension, then swiftly dissolving it. In that fleeting space of emotional disarmament, people become far more compliant, far more open to suggestion. The technique operates not through coercion, but through the natural rhythms of emotional contrast. It reminds us that the mind, unsettled by sudden fear and then soothed by unexpected relief, often seeks closure through cooperation, as if trying to stabilize itself after the sudden swing of emotion. Understanding this phenomenon offers profound insights into human psychology, communication, and the subtle ways in which emotions shape behavior. The fear then relief technique is rooted in a simple truth. Emotions, particularly intense emotions, alter our cognitive processing. Fear triggers a state of heightened alertness. The body floods with adrenaline. The mind becomes narrowly focused on survival, scanning for threats, solutions, and safe exits. Then, when the source of fear is suddenly removed, the body relaxes, but the mind remains momentarily disoriented. In that brief, unstable window, caught between tension and calm, the usual defenses of skepticism and resistance are weakened. The individual, seeking to regain equilibrium, becomes more suggestible, more willing to comply with requests that might otherwise have been met with careful scrutiny or polite refusal. Classic experiments in psychology have demonstrated this effect vividly. In one study, researchers staged scenarios where individuals were startled, such as being approached by a stern-looking authority figure, implying trouble, only to have the situation quickly diffused into harmlessness. Immediately after this relief, the individuals were asked to perform small favors, like donating money or filling out surveys. The results consistently showed that compliance rates skyrocketed in the aftermath of fear, followed by relief. The emotional roller coaster left people temporarily off balance, making them more receptive to requests they might otherwise have resisted. The mechanics of the fear then relief technique are subtle but precise. First, there must be a genuine induction of mild fear or tension, not overwhelming, not traumatizing, but enough to create a real emotional spike. It could be the sudden announcement of an unexpected problem, the implication of a potential mistake, or the suggestion of an impending inconvenience. Then, just as the fear begins to take root, it must be resolved swiftly and completely. The resolution must feel sincere, restoring a sense of safety and normalcy. In the space left by that emotional whiplash, the ground is fertile for requests, agreements, and suggestions. Importantly, the fear then relief technique does not rely on deception or cruelty. When used ethically, the fear induced is mild and the relief genuine. It is not about traumatizing others or manipulating them into harmful decisions. Rather, it is about understanding how emotional contrast affects openness and using that knowledge responsibly to foster cooperation and dialogue. In situations like crisis negotiation, customer service recovery, or even teaching, guiding someone through a moment of tension followed by reassurance can build trust, attention, and willingness to engage. We encounter milder versions of this phenomenon regularly in everyday life. Consider the momentary panic when you think you have lost your keys or your phone, only to find them moments later. The flood of relief that follows often leaves you unusually generous or forgiving. Or imagine narrowly avoiding a minor accident and then finding yourself strangely agreeable to whatever is suggested afterward. These everyday experiences reflect the powerful emotional reset created by fear, followed by relief. A reset that temporarily softens defenses and sharpens receptivity. In the world of persuasion and sales, the fear-then-relief technique is sometimes employed, often subtly. A salesperson might hint at a potential problem with a product you are considering, raising the specter of a flaw, only to immediately assure you that the issue is easily resolved or that a better option is available. The initial worry draws your focus and attention. The swift resolution restores comfort and trust, making you more inclined to proceed with the purchase. Used carefully and ethically, this technique can guide clients to better choices. Used manipulatively, it risks damaging trust and credibility. The fear-then-relief dynamic also operates within relationships, negotiations, and leadership. A leader might point out a looming challenge that threatens a team's goals, sparking concern, only to immediately propose a reassuring plan of action. The team, relieved and grateful for the guidance, may become more committed to the leader's vision. In interpersonal relationships, acknowledging fears or concerns and then offering genuine comfort can deepen trust, creating bonds forged in the emotional journey from anxiety to relief. However, as with all techniques that touch deep emotional currents, the fear-then-relief technique must be wielded with care and respect. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. If individuals sense that their emotions are being manipulated insincerely, the backlash can be swift and severe. Thus, the technique must be grounded in authenticity. The fear must be based on real concerns, and the relief must be genuine and lasting. Ethical use of this method strengthens relationships and communication. Unethical use corrodes them. At a deeper psychological level, the fear-then-relief technique reveals how deeply emotion governs cognition. We often imagine ourselves as rational creatures, weighing evidence and making careful decisions. Yet in moments of emotional intensity, particularly fear, our rational faculties are temporarily hijacked. Fear narrows focus, elevates urgency, and primes us for action. Relief opens the gates, softens resistance, and makes us hungry for stability. Recognizing these emotional rhythms allows us not only to understand others better, but also to be more mindful of how our own decisions are shaped. Self-awareness becomes critical. By recognizing when we ourselves are caught in the cycle of fear and relief, we can pause and reflect before acting. Was this decision made out of genuine conviction or in the afterglow of emotional release? Are we agreeing because the choice truly aligns with our values, or because we are unconsciously seeking to stabilize our emotional state? Such mindfulness protects us from being unduly swayed and allows us to reclaim a deeper kind of autonomy, even amid emotional turbulence. On a philosophical level, the fear-then-relief technique mirrors the cycles of life itself. Periods of uncertainty, fear, and struggle are often followed by moments of clarity, peace, and renewal. Growth often arises not in the absence of fear, but through the passage from fear to relief, from tension to understanding. Recognizing this broader pattern can inspire compassion for ourselves and for others as we navigate the emotional tides that inevitably arise. Moreover, the technique hints at the importance of emotional contrast in making experiences meaningful. Just as light is more beautiful against a backdrop of darkness and joy sweeter after sorrow, so too is relief more profound when it follows fear. In this way, emotional contrasts enrich the human experience, deepening our appreciation for peace, safety, and connection when they return. The fear-then-relief technique is more than a tool of persuasion. It is a window into the emotional currents that shape human interaction. It teaches us that influence is not simply a matter of logic or argument, but of timing, emotion, and empathy. When used wisely, It can open doors to communication, cooperation, and mutual support. When misused, it can fracture trust and harden hearts. The true mastery of this technique lies not in manipulating fear, but in guiding people through it, acknowledging the realities that spark anxiety, offering genuine solutions, and honoring the emotional journeys that make us human. It invites us to see influence not as a conquest, but as a dance that moves through fear and relief, tension and comfort, uncertainty and trust. And so, the next time you encounter fear, whether in yourself or in another, remember, relief is not the end of the story. It is a threshold. It is a space where openness blossoms, where influence is most potent, and where the deepest bonds of trust and understanding can be formed. The decoy effect. In the intricate world of human decision-making, choices rarely unfold in a vacuum. Every option we consider is subtly shaped by the context in which it appears. Among the many fascinating forces that guide our selections, the decoy effect stands out as a particularly elegant manipulation of perception. It reveals how adding a third, less attractive option, a decoy, can dramatically shift preferences, making the choice we want someone to pick seem not only reasonable but obvious. By presenting options strategically, the decoy effect gently nudges decisions without overt persuasion, exploiting our natural inclination to compare and choose based on relative rather than absolute value. The decoy effect hinges on asymmetrical dominance. When a decoy is introduced, it is designed to be clearly inferior to one option, but only somewhat inferior to another. This asymmetry makes the superior option look more appealing, simply by contrast. The decoy is never meant to be chosen. It exists only to tip the scales, framing the preferred option as the most rational, valuable, and satisfying choice. It is not forceful. It is not aggressive. It is quiet, almost invisible, yet its influence on human behavior is profound. Consider a simple, classic example. Imagine you are at a movie theater deciding between two sizes of popcorn. A small costs $3 and a large costs $7. The large seems expensive. Many would opt for the smaller size. Now introduce a third option, a medium size for $6.50. Suddenly the large popcorn, only 50 cents more, appears to be a far better deal. In reality, nothing has changed about the value of the large popcorn, but the medium, priced so close yet offering less, makes the large feel like a logical, even necessary choice. The decoy has done its work. The decoy effect was first rigorously explored by marketing and behavioral economics researchers, who demonstrated again and again that people's choices could be shifted predictably by the careful introduction of strategically designed decoys. What these studies revealed is that human beings are not purely rational calculators, weighing options independently based on intrinsic value. Instead, we are deeply comparative creatures. We assess value relationally, not absolutely. We look for contrasts, for differences that stand out, and we are heavily influenced by how choices are framed and presented. The decoy effect works because it simplifies decision-making. Choosing between two options can feel complex, especially if they trade off different attributes: price versus quality, convenience versus luxury. The decoy removes that ambiguity by making one option clearly dominate another. Our minds, seeking cognitive ease, are drawn toward the option that offers an obvious advantage. The presence of the decoy allows us to feel smart, rational, and justified in our choice, even though the decoy was never truly a contender. Marketers, salespeople, and negotiators use the decoy effect all the time, often without it being consciously noticed. Subscription plans, for example, frequently employ decoys. You might see an online magazine offering a digital-only subscription for $50, a print-only subscription for $100, and a digital plus print subscription for $100. The print-only option seems absurd. Why pay the same for less? Yet its presence drives people toward the bundled package, which now feels like a bargain. Without the decoy, People might hesitate. With the decoy, the choice feels obvious. Importantly, the decoy effect is not about deception or trickery, at least when used ethically. It does not involve lying about the nature of the options or hiding important information. Rather, it involves understanding how human psychology works, how framing and comparison shape our perceptions, and arranging options to guide decisions. Ethical use of the decoy effect aligns available choices with genuine value, helping people make decisions that are satisfying and beneficial. Unethical use, by contrast, manipulates emotions and perceptions in ways that serve only the manipulator's interests. Understanding the decoy effect empowers us not only to influence others, but also to recognize when we ourselves are being influenced. Awareness is a shield. When faced with choices, we can pause and ask, is one of these options serving merely as a contrast point? Am I evaluating these choices independently? Or am I being nudged by the way they are presented? Such reflection restores autonomy, allowing us to choose with clarity rather than unconscious bias. At a deeper level, the decoy effect invites reflection on the nature of human judgment itself. It reminds us that our minds crave simplicity, certainty, and justification. We like to believe we are purely rational, but much of our decision-making is relational and contextual. We judge not only the thing before us, but also what it looks like next to its neighbors. This is not a flaw, but a feature of how we navigate a complex, overwhelming world. Kony Imbawan, comparison allows for quicker decisions, but it also opens the door to subtle influences we might not immediately perceive. The decoy effect also suggests strategies for better decision-making in everyday life. When evaluating options, it can help to strip away the context and imagine each choice in isolation. Would you still prefer this option if the decoy were not present? Would it still feel like the best choice if judged solely on its merits? By training ourselves to recognize the role of framing and comparative bias, we can make choices that are more aligned with our true needs and values. In leadership, teaching, and parenting, the decoy effect can be used to guide decisions while preserving a sense of agency. Offering structured choices with a clear best option, subtly highlighted, can reduce decision fatigue, foster commitment, and support learning. A teacher might present 3 project ideas, with one designed to be more engaging and achievable than the others. A parent might offer 3 weekend activities, gently nudging toward the one that aligns best with family goals. When used thoughtfully, the decoy effect can empower rather than manipulate, offering structure while honoring choice. Interestingly, the decoy effect reveals something about how humans experience satisfaction. When people feel they have made a smart, well-justified choice, satisfaction increases. Buyer's remorse is less likely when the chosen option feels superior, not only in absolute terms, but relative to the available alternatives. In this sense, the decoy effect not only influences the decision itself, but also shapes how happy people feel about that decision afterward. However, it is crucial to recognize that the decoy effect, like all tools of influence, carries ethical responsibilities. It must be used with care, respect, and integrity. Offering a decoy that highlights a genuinely better choice can be a service, helping people navigate complexity. But offering a decoy to steer people toward overpriced, unnecessary, or harmful options violates trust and diminishes human dignity. Influence must always be balanced with respect for the freedom and intelligence of those we seek to guide. At a philosophical level, the decoy effect invites us to embrace a more compassionate view of human cognition. It reminds us that imperfection is built into the architecture of the mind. We are not computers calculating objective utility. We are beings of context, comparison, and intuition. Rather than lamenting these tendencies, we can work with them wisely, both in guiding others and in guiding ourselves. We can recognize our vulnerabilities not as weaknesses, but as invitations to greater awareness, mindfulness, and ethical responsibility. The decoy effect is a subtle mirror reflecting the dance between perception and reality. It shows us that choice is not merely about the options themselves, but about how they are framed, compared, and understood. It reminds us that the mind seeks not only what is good, but what feels obvious, justified, and smart. And it challenges us to engage with our decisions more thoughtfully, peeling back the layers of influence to discover the choices that truly serve our highest goals and deepest values. The next time you are faced with a choice that seems obvious, pause and ask, what made it feel that way? Look for the decoy standing quietly in the background, shaping your perception. By seeing it clearly, you reclaim the deeper freedom that comes not just from choosing, but from choosing wisely, with open eyes and a discerning heart. Social proof. In the quiet undercurrents of human behavior, there is a force as steady and invisible as gravity, guiding our actions, shaping our choices, and influencing our beliefs. It is the principle of social proof, the idea that we look to others to determine what is right, what is acceptable, and what is safe. When uncertain, we instinctively turn our gaze outward, scanning the behaviors, opinions, and decisions of those around us to guide our own. It is not merely a learned behavior. It is a deep and ancient instinct, woven into the fabric of social life since the earliest days of humanity. Understanding social proof offers profound insights into influence, persuasion, and the timeless human longing to belong. At its core, social proof is rooted in the need for certainty. The world is vast, complex, and often ambiguous. In countless situations, we face choices without clear answers. Is this restaurant good? Is this product trustworthy? Is this behavior acceptable? In the absence of definitive information, observing others provides a shortcut to decision-making. If many people are doing it, the logic goes, it must be the right thing to do. Safety in numbers is not just a physical reality, but a psychological comfort. When others converge on a choice, it creates a reassuring signal that we are moving in the right direction. The power of social proof becomes especially pronounced in moments of uncertainty. When the correct course of action is unclear, when stakes are high, or when we feel unfamiliar with a situation, we become particularly attuned to the behaviors of others. A single person standing and applauding at the end of a performance might be ignored, but if a few more join in, a wave of applause often follows, sweeping through the audience with irresistible momentum. What began as individual uncertainty dissolves into collective certainty, born not of deep analysis, but of following the social signals around us. Marketers, leaders, and communicators have long understood and harnessed the power of social proof. Customer reviews, testimonial videos, star ratings, social media likes, all are forms of social signaling designed to tap into this principle. When we see that thousands have bought a product, that many others have endorsed a service, or that a cause has widespread support, we feel a magnetic pull toward agreement. The decisions of others serve as a validation mechanism, reducing our sense of risk and increasing our comfort with choosing the same path. Social proof also explains why trends can spread with astonishing speed. When a behavior gains visible momentum, whether a fashion style, a viral challenge, or a political movement, it creates a feedback loop. As more people adopt the behavior, it becomes even more visible, which in turn draws even more participants. Popularity, what begins as the choice of a few, can quickly cascade into the behavior of many, driven less by careful deliberation and more by the simple observation that others are already on board. However, the influence of social proof is not uniform. It is shaped by several important factors. The similarity of the group matters greatly. We are more influenced by people who seem similar to us, those who share our background, values, or identity. If we see others like ourselves making a choice, the pull of social proof becomes even stronger. Authority and expertise also amplify social proof. If an expert or a respected figure endorses an action, it carries more weight than if a random stranger does. Finally, the number of people matters. The larger the group demonstrating a behavior, the stronger the influence. Social proof can be a powerful force for good. It can encourage positive behaviors such as recycling, voting, or donating to charity by showing that these actions are common and socially valued. Campaigns that highlight how many people are taking responsible actions often achieve better results than those that merely urge people to change. When people see that a behavior is already widespread, they are more likely to join in, not because they are weak-willed, but because social proof reassures them that the behavior is accepted, effective, and safe. Yet social proof also carries risks. It can lead to herd behavior, where individuals follow the crowd without critical thought, sometimes with destructive consequences. Financial bubbles, mob mentality, and the spread of misinformation are all examples of social proof gone awry. When the majority is wrong, or when early adopters are misinformed, the pressure to conform can lead entire groups astray. Thus, while social proof is a natural and often helpful guide, it is not infallible. It must be tempered with critical thinking and a willingness to question the signals we observe. Understanding social proof can also help us become better communicators and leaders. By highlighting the positive behaviors already present within a group, we can encourage others to adopt those behaviors as well, rather than focusing on negative behaviors, such as lamenting how few people recycle. We can emphasize the growing number who do. Framing actions as part of a positive social norm harnesses the power of social proof to inspire rather than to shame, creating upward spirals of constructive change. In personal relationships, social proof can build trust and rapport. When someone sees that others respect, like, and trust you, they are more likely to do the same. This is why introductions, endorsements, and social credibility matter. People take cues from the social networks around them, using the acceptance of others as a proxy for their own evaluations. Cultivating genuine goodwill and positive reputation within a community can thus amplify influence far beyond individual interaction. At a deeper psychological level, the pull of social proof reveals something tender and beautiful about human nature. It speaks to our innate need to belong, to connect, to find our place within the tribe. We are not isolated beings. We are woven into a fabric of relationships, norms, and shared understandings. Observing and aligning with the behaviors of others is not merely a cognitive shortcut. It is an expression of our fundamental sociality, our deep yearning to move through life together rather than alone. Recognizing the influence of social proof can also make us wiser in our own choices. By pausing to ask whether we are choosing something because it truly aligns with our values or simply because it is popular, we reclaim a measure of autonomy. Awareness does not negate the pull of social proof, but it allows us to navigate it with greater consciousness, choosing when to follow and when to chart our own course. In leadership, this awareness is critical. Leaders who understand social proof can build movements not by dictating behavior, but by nurturing visible examples of the desired norms. They create environments where positive actions are seen, celebrated, and emulated. They recognize that people often do not need more information or more arguments. They need to see that others like them are already moving forward. Social proof also teaches humility. It reminds us that much of what we believe, value, and pursue is shaped by the social currents we swim within. Our choices are influenced not only by our internal reasoning, but by the subtle, powerful echoes of those around us. This recognition invites compassion for ourselves when we find ourselves swept along with the crowd, and for others who are navigating the same invisible forces. Social proof is not merely a tool of persuasion. It is a mirror reflecting our social essence. It shows us that to be human is to be relational, to seek validation, to find comfort in shared experience. It teaches us that influence flows not only through arguments and ideas, but through the quiet, persistent presence of collective behavior. And it invites us to use this understanding wisely, to foster connection, to build community, and to lead by the power of example. The next time you find yourself drawn toward a choice because others seem to be choosing it too, pause and smile. Recognize the ancient wisdom at work, the deep, enduring instinct to find safety and meaning among others. And in that moment of awareness, Choose not just to follow, but to follow wisely, guided not only by the crowd, but by the quiet compass of your own heart. The reciprocity principle. Among the timeless forces that quietly guide human behavior, few are as powerful, as universal, and as deeply ingrained as the reciprocity principle. It is the simple yet profound idea that when someone does something for us, no matter how small, we feel a natural urge to return the favor. Reciprocity is not merely a social custom, it is a foundational pillar of human society woven into our psychology and our cultures across time and place. It creates bonds of trust, cooperation, and mutual support. It builds bridges between strangers. It sustains families, communities, and civilizations. Understanding the reciprocity principle offers profound insights into influence, connection, and the subtle ways we shape and are shaped by those around us. The essence of reciprocity is deeply tied to the human experience of survival and belonging. In ancient times, cooperation among individuals often determined whether a person or a group would thrive or perish. Sharing food, shelter, and protection strengthened communities. Acts of kindness and generosity fostered alliances that could mean the difference between life and death. Over generations, the instinct to return favors became deeply embedded in the human mind, a reliable social glue that bound people together in networks of mutual aid. Even today, in our modern and complex world, that primal impulse to give back endures, influencing countless daily interactions, often without our conscious awareness. One of the most remarkable aspects of the reciprocity principle is its strength. Studies in social psychology have shown that even small acts of generosity can trigger a powerful sense of obligation. A free sample at a grocery store, a small gift at a hotel, a complimentary consultation. All these minor gestures can significantly increase the likelihood that the recipient will respond in kind, whether through a purchase, a tip, or ongoing loyalty. The initial gift creates a sense of indebtedness, a subtle psychological imbalance that we instinctively seek to correct by reciprocating. Importantly, the reciprocity principle works best when the initial gift or favor is perceived as genuine and freely given. If the gesture feels manipulative or transactional, the natural impulse to reciprocate weakens. People do not want to feel trapped or coerced. They want to feel honored and respected. Authenticity, therefore, is critical. A sincere act of generosity, given without immediate expectation, plants a seed of goodwill that blossoms into voluntary and enthusiastic reciprocation. Marketers and fundraisers often skillfully harness the power of reciprocity. Nonprofits may send small gifts, address labels, stickers, or tokens of appreciation along with donation requests, significantly boosting response rates. Restaurants might offer a complimentary appetizer or dessert to encourage a generous tip. Even in business negotiations, a party who makes the first concession often triggers a reciprocal concession from the other side. In each case, the initial act of giving sets a cycle of giving in motion, creating a rhythm of exchange that benefits both parties. Yet the power of reciprocity extends far beyond commerce and negotiation. It shapes personal relationships in profound ways. Acts of kindness, attentiveness, and generosity build emotional bank accounts between people, fostering trust, affection, and resilience. A friend who remembers your birthday with a thoughtful note inspires you to be there for them in their moment of need. A colleague who helps you meet a deadline earns your loyalty and support in return. These small acts of giving and returning weave the fabric of friendship, love, and community. Reciprocity also plays a key role in conflict resolution and diplomacy. Extending a gesture of goodwill, even a small one, can break cycles of hostility and open the door to dialogue. A sincere apology, a symbolic gift, or a simple acknowledgement of the other party's needs can diffuse tension and create a space for cooperation. When one side takes the first step toward healing, the other side often feels a powerful pull to meet them halfway. However, it is important to recognize that reciprocity, like all powerful forces, can be used ethically or manipulatively. When used ethically, it builds relationships based on mutual respect and genuine goodwill. When exploited, it can create obligations that people feel pressured to meet, even against their better judgment. The line between fostering goodwill and engineering indebtedness is delicate. The true art of practicing reciprocity lies in giving freely, trusting that the natural impulse to reciprocate will arise organically, without coercion or expectation. At a deeper psychological level, the reciprocity principle reveals something profound about human identity. To give and to receive are not merely transactions. They are affirmations of connection, expressions of our shared humanity. When we receive a gift or a favor, it reminds us that we are seen, valued, and cared for. When we give in return, we affirm those same values. Reciprocity is not about balancing the scales in a cold, mechanical sense. It is about maintaining the warmth of human connection. Understanding the reciprocity principle also invites us to reflect on how we move through the world. Are we generous with our time, our attention, our kindness? Do we extend gestures of goodwill without keeping score, trusting that generosity returns in its own time and way? Or do we hold back, fearing that giving will leave us diminished? Paradoxically, those who give freely often find themselves enriched, not always immediately or directly, but in the enduring currency of trust, reputation, and joy. Practicing reciprocity can transform daily life in subtle but powerful ways. A smile to a stranger, a word of encouragement to a colleague, a small favor to a neighbor. All these acts create ripples of goodwill that often return to us multiplied. Each act of generosity plants seeds of connection that may blossom in unexpected and beautiful ways. Reciprocity reminds us that no act of kindness is wasted. Each one contributes to the invisible web of support and belonging that sustains us all. In leadership, the reciprocity principle is a cornerstone of influence. Leaders who give first, who offer support, recognition, and trust, earn the loyalty and commitment of their teams. By demonstrating generosity and respect, they inspire others to mirror those values, creating cultures of collaboration and mutual uplift. The most effective leaders are not those who demand loyalty, but those who cultivate it through consistent, genuine acts of giving. At a broader societal level, the reciprocity principle underpins social cohesion. Communities where people look out for each other, offering help without immediate expectation of return, tend to be stronger, healthier, and more resilient. When reciprocity is woven into the social fabric, trust grows, cooperation flourishes, and the common good is advanced. In times of crisis, these networks of mutual aid become lifelines, sustaining individuals and communities alike. Yet perhaps the most beautiful aspect of the reciprocity principle is its capacity to heal. In a world often fractured by division and mistrust, small acts of giving can bridge chasms that seem unbridgeable. A gesture of kindness can soften hardened hearts. A gift of time or attention can rebuild broken trust. Reciprocity reminds us that while we cannot control the actions of others, we can always choose to take the first step, to extend the first hand, to offer the first gift. The reciprocity principle is more than a tool of influence. It is a philosophy of living. It invites us to be generous not because we must, but because we can. It teaches us that every act of giving, however small, carries within it the power to change lives, to forge connections, and to build a more compassionate world. It reminds us that in giving we also receive, not just material returns, but the deeper rewards of meaning, belonging, and love. The next time you find yourself offered a small kindness, a free sample, a warm smile, an unexpected favor, pause and notice the gentle tug of gratitude and the urge to give back. Feel the ancient rhythm of reciprocity stirring within you, and know that in honoring it, you are participating in one of humanity's oldest, most beautiful dances, a dance of giving, receiving, and giving again, forever weaving us closer together in the shared journey of life. The power of silence. In a world that never stops speaking, where noise fills every moment and conversations race forward without pause, silence remains one of the most powerful tools we can wield. Silence is often misunderstood, seen as emptiness or awkwardness, a void to be quickly filled. Yet within silence lies profound strength. Particularly after asking a question, the simple act of staying silent can unlock truths, build deeper connections, and even guide negotiations towards swift and unexpected agreement. Silence unsettles because it is unusual. It invites reflection because it demands attention. And when used wisely, it becomes a catalyst for honesty, vulnerability, and influence that words alone can rarely achieve. The power of silence rests on a deep and universal discomfort with awkwardness. Most people, when confronted with a gap in conversation, feel an almost irresistible urge to fill it. The pause grows heavy, amplifying self-consciousness. Thoughts race, anxiety rises. Someone must speak, and often it is the other person who moves first. In doing so, they reveal more, explain further, or make concessions they might otherwise have withheld. Silence, then, becomes an invisible force, pulling information outward, opening doors that might have remained closed. This dynamic is particularly evident in negotiation and persuasion. Skilled negotiators understand that after making an offer or asking a crucial question, speaking again too quickly weakens their position. The temptation to justify, to soften, to explain away the discomfort is strong, but yielding to it forfeits the hidden advantage of silence. By holding the silence, by sitting calmly in the stillness, the negotiator creates space for the other party to react, to respond, to adjust. It is within that space that agreements are often born, not through forceful argument, but through the quiet gravity of patience. Beyond negotiation, the power of silence plays a critical role in building authentic relationships. After asking a meaningful question, one that touches on feelings, dreams, or fears, silence signals respect. It says, "I am willing to wait. I am here to listen. I am not rushing you toward an answer." In that space, the other person feels seen, honored, and safe to speak their truth. They are not performing for an audience, they are sharing with a witness. Silence, used with compassion, creates a sanctuary where honesty can flourish. Psychologists have long noted that in therapy, the moments when a counselor simply waits, without interruption, without judgment, are often the moments when breakthroughs occur. Clients, allowed to sit in their own silence, often find their way to insights that no amount of advice could have uncovered. Similarly, in leadership, the ability to ask a question and then resist the urge to dominate the conversation empowers others to find their voice, to own their ideas, and to step into responsibility and creativity. Silence also serves as a mirror. In the absence of external noise, people hear their own thoughts more clearly. They confront their uncertainties, their contradictions, their true desires. This self-reflection can be unsettling, but it is also necessary for growth and change. When we fill every gap with chatter, we shield ourselves from this encounter with the self. When we hold silence, we invite it. Yet using silence effectively requires more than simply remaining quiet. It demands presence. Passive silence, silence accompanied by impatience, judgment, or distraction, erodes trust. Active silence, silence filled with attentive presence, open body language, and genuine curiosity, nurtures trust. It is not merely the absence of speech, but the fullness of attention that gives silence its power. Culturally, comfort with silence varies. In some cultures, long pauses in conversation are natural and expected, a sign of thoughtfulness and respect. In others, silence is feared and avoided, a sign of disinterest or failure. Understanding these cultural nuances is essential when using silence as a tool for connection and influence. What feels respectful and powerful in one context may feel alienating in another. Sensitivity to the expectations and rhythms of those we are engaging with ensures that our silence is received as intended. Practicing the power of silence also demands self-mastery. We must learn to manage our own discomfort, to resist the inner voice that urges us to speak simply to fill the air. We must become comfortable with pauses, with unfinished moments, with the uncertainty of what might arise if we simply wait. This is not easy in a world that prizes quickness, loudness, and certainty. But it is within the slow, quiet spaces that the deepest connections are often forged. One powerful exercise is simply to notice the next time you ask someone a question. Observe your instinct to fill the silence that follows. Feel the tug of impatience, and then, gently, resist it. Hold the silence a moment longer than feels comfortable. Watch what happens. Often, the other person will lean forward, search their thoughts more deeply, and offer something real, something that would have remained hidden had you rushed to speak. The power of silence is especially potent in moments of high emotion. When someone is grieving, angry, or overwhelmed, words often fail. Well-intentioned advice or attempts to fix the situation can fall flat or even cause harm. Silence, on the other hand, offers presence without pressure. It communicates, "I am here with you," without demanding that the other person move, change, or explain. In the stillness, healing can begin. Silence also invites creativity. In meetings, brainstorming sessions, or problem-solving discussions, the willingness to sit in silence after posing a question encourages deeper thought. Quick answers often skim the surface. Silence invites exploration beneath. It allows ideas to percolate, connections to form, and innovation to emerge. By resisting the rush to fill every moment, we create space for the extraordinary to arrive. Yet, silence must be wielded with wisdom and kindness. It is a tool, not a weapon. Silence used to punish, to control, or to manipulate wounds rather than heals. The intention behind the silence matters as much as the silence itself. When our silence is rooted in respect, patience, and openness, it becomes a gift. When it is rooted in anger, superiority, or withdrawal, it becomes a barrier. At a philosophical level, the power of silence reflects deeper truths about communication and existence. Silence reminds us that meaning is not always found in words, that presence is more powerful than performance, that understanding often arises not from speaking but from listening, truly listening, without agenda, without interruption, without fear. Silence teaches us to trust the spaces between, to honor the unseen, to find richness not just in what is said, but in what is allowed to emerge. In a noisy world, mastering the art of silence is an act of courage. It is a rebellion against the tyranny of urgency. It is a return to the natural rhythms of conversation, where pauses are not gaps to be filled, but bridges to be crossed slowly and attentively. It is a reclaiming of depth in a culture obsessed with surface. When we embrace the power of silence, we become better listeners, better leaders, better friends. We open doors that words alone cannot unlock. We create spaces where truth can speak softly, where hearts can open without fear, where transformation can begin. And so, the next time you ask a question, whether in negotiation, in conversation, or in a moment of quiet connection, pause, breathe, wait, trust the silence to do its work. In that space, you may find not just answers, but something even more precious. The deeper currents of understanding that flow only when we are brave enough to listen, not only with our ears, but with our whole being. Priming. In the vast and often hidden world of influence, there exists a subtle yet profoundly powerful mechanism known as priming. It is the art of introducing an idea, a feeling, or a context beforehand through words, images, sounds, or gestures, so that later behavior and decisions are quietly shaped without conscious awareness. Priming works not by argument, debate, or demand, but by gently setting the stage. It prepares the mind, frames perception, and alters response patterns in ways so smooth that we seldom recognize their origins. Understanding priming reveals not only the delicate ways we can influence others, but also how easily we ourselves are shaped by the unseen cues around us. At its heart, priming taps into the associative nature of the human mind. Our thoughts, memories, emotions, and behaviors are interconnected like a vast web. When one node in the web is activated, related nodes are automatically brought closer to the surface of consciousness. Mention the word cold, and you are more likely to notice a chilly breeze. Show an image of an elderly person, and people may unconsciously slow their walking pace. These effects occur without conscious intention, revealing the intricate machinery beneath our awareness that quietly steers our actions and interpretations. The phenomenon of priming was famously demonstrated in psychological experiments throughout the late 20th century. In one study, participants who were exposed to words associated with rudeness, such as bold, aggressive, and interrupt, were more likely to interrupt a conversation than those primed with words like polite and courteous. In another, individuals primed with words related to aging, such as Florida and retirement, walked more slowly afterward than those primed with neutral words. These findings astonished researchers and the public alike, revealing just how deeply environmental cues can penetrate and guide behavior beneath the surface of conscious thought. Priming operates because the mind seeks efficiency. Faced with an endless stream of stimuli, our brains use past experiences, associations, and context to anticipate and interpret new information quickly. Priming quietly tilts this interpretive lens. It does not force decisions. Rather, it nudges the mind into certain pathways, making particular thoughts and behaviors more accessible, more likely, more natural. This makes priming an extraordinarily powerful tool for communication, persuasion, education, and even personal growth. In marketing, priming is used to evoke emotions and shape perceptions. A luxury car advertisement may feature images of grandeur, sophistication, and success, priming viewers to associate the brand with status and prestige. Retailers might play slow, calming music in a store to encourage lingering and thoughtful purchases. Political campaigns strategically prime voters with symbols of patriotism, family, or prosperity before presenting their messages. In each case, priming sets the emotional and cognitive stage, creating a fertile ground for favorable responses. But priming is not confined to the realm of advertising and persuasion. It also plays a profound role in everyday life. A teacher who begins a class by praising curiosity primes students to approach the material with open minds. A parent who reminds a child of their past kindness primes them to act compassionately in the future. A leader who opens a meeting by highlighting past team successes primes the group for confidence and collaboration. In each of these cases, priming is not manipulation but preparation, an artful setting of context that supports desired attitudes and behaviors. Priming can also be used for self-development. By intentionally surrounding ourselves with positive cues, uplifting books, inspiring images, encouraging words, we prime ourselves for optimism, resilience, and growth. Visualizing success before a challenge primes the mind for confidence. Reflecting on values before making a decision primes behavior to align with personal integrity. The environments we create, the media we consume, and the internal dialogues we nurture all serve as powerful primers, shaping who we become through subtle, repeated influence. Yet, priming is not infallible. Its effects are real but often fragile, dependent on context, timing, and individual differences. Awareness of being primed can sometimes weaken or even reverse its effects. Moreover, priming is not a tool for total control. It influences probabilities, not certainties. Recognizing these limitations ensures that we use priming wisely and ethically, respecting the autonomy and dignity of those we seek to influence. Ethical use of priming demands transparency of intention. It involves setting a stage that invites rather than coerces, supports rather than manipulates. It means creating environments where positive behaviors are naturally encouraged, not engineered against people's will. In education, therapy, leadership, and community building, ethical priming nurtures the best in people, guiding them toward growth, integrity, and flourishing. At a deeper level, priming teaches humility about the nature of human freedom. We like to believe that our choices are purely rational, entirely self-generated. But the reality is more complex. Our thoughts and actions are profoundly shaped by context, by memories we did not choose to recall, by associations we did not consciously create. This is not cause for despair, but for compassion, for ourselves and for others. We are all navigating a sea of influences, seen and unseen, striving to chart a course with the tools we have. Understanding priming invites mindfulness. It encourages us to become curators of our environments, architects of our mental spaces. What are we priming ourselves with each day? What cues do we allow into our homes, our conversations, our minds? What seeds are we planting? Seeds of fear, cynicism, and division, or seeds of hope, kindness, and courage? By becoming more intentional about the primes we encounter and create, we reclaim a measure of authorship over our own lives. Priming also offers lessons for creativity and problem-solving. Exposure to diverse ideas, rich metaphors, and novel experiences can prime the mind for innovative thinking. Artists, writers, and inventors often prime themselves with wide reading, varied experiences, and stimulating conversations before entering creative work. By setting the stage with rich and varied inputs, they invite surprising, generative connections to emerge. In this way, priming becomes not just a tool for influence, but a doorway to new possibilities. In leadership, priming can be a quiet yet transformative force. Leaders who consistently prime their teams with visions of shared purpose, stories of resilience, and examples of excellence cultivate cultures of trust, innovation, and commitment. They recognize that change is not imposed by decree, but grows organically from the seeds planted through daily words, images, and actions. Leadership through priming is leadership through inspiration, guiding not by force, but by resonance. At a philosophical level, priming reminds us that reality is not fixed and objective, but deeply interpretive. The world we experience is filtered through the primes we carry, our expectations, our memories, our unconscious associations. Every perception is a construction, every interpretation a tapestry woven from past and present cues. Recognizing this invites a gentler, more curious approach to life. It encourages us to question our immediate reactions, to seek broader perspectives, to remain open to repriming our minds toward greater wisdom and compassion. The power of priming lies in its subtlety. It is the whisper that shifts a thought, the glance that changes a mood, the symbol that alters a choice. It operates quietly beneath the roar of rational arguments and the flash of overt persuasion. Yet it is often these quiet influences that leave the deepest marks, shaping not just what we think, but how we think. Not just what we choose, but how we live. The next time you find yourself feeling a sudden shift in mood, a new thought arising seemingly from nowhere, or a decision tilting unexpectedly in a particular direction, pause and wonder, what prime might have set this in motion? In that moment of awareness, you reclaim a deeper freedom. The freedom not just to be influenced, but to influence consciously, thoughtfully, and beautifully. In a world filled with noise, the gentle art of priming reminds us that the most profound changes often begin not with a shout, but with a whisper that, once planted, can grow into a new way of seeing, choosing, and being. The halo effect. In the intricate dance of human perception, few biases are as quietly powerful and far-reaching as the halo effect. It is the tendency for our impressions in one area, such as physical attractiveness, charisma, or competence, to spill over and influence our judgments in unrelated domains. When someone shines brightly in one aspect, we often unconsciously assume that they shine in all others as well. Like a glowing halo that crowns the head of a saint, one positive trait can illuminate the entire person in our minds, casting them in a favorable light that may or may not be fully deserved. Understanding the halo effect reveals much about the fragility of judgment and the hidden forces that shape how we see, evaluate, and connect with others. The halo effect was first identified by psychologist Edward Thorndike in the early 20th century. In a military study, officers were asked to evaluate soldiers on a variety of qualities, such as physical appearance, intelligence, leadership ability, and character. Thorndike found that high ratings in one area tended to correlate with high ratings in all others, even when there was no objective reason for such a link. A soldier who was tall and neatly groomed, for example, was often judged as more capable, more disciplined, and more trustworthy, even in the absence of evidence. Thorndike's discovery revealed a profound flaw in human judgment: the tendency to generalize from one positive characteristic to an entire character assessment. The halo effect operates automatically, without conscious intention. It is an efficiency mechanism, a cognitive shortcut that allows the mind to make rapid assessments in a complex and uncertain world. When information is incomplete, as it often is, the mind fills in the gaps based on what is already known, or, more accurately, what is already perceived. If someone is attractive, we assume they are also kind. If they are articulate, we infer intelligence. If they seem confident, we believe they are competent. These inferences are not carefully reasoned conclusions. They are quick, intuitive leaps driven by the associations our minds are wired to make. The consequences of the halo effect are vast. In hiring decisions, for example, candidates who are physically attractive or socially charming often receive more favorable evaluations, even if their actual qualifications are no stronger than others. In education, students perceived as more diligent or likable may receive higher grades or more encouragement from teachers, subtly shaping their academic trajectory. In the justice system, defendants who appear respectable and well-dressed are more likely to be treated leniently by juries. In marketing, products endorsed by celebrities gain credibility and appeal, not necessarily because the products are superior, but because the halo of the endorser's fame extends to the product itself. The halo effect also shapes personal relationships. Early impressions carry tremendous weight. A strong first impression, whether of warmth, intelligence, or humor, can color all subsequent perceptions, leading us to overlook flaws and amplify virtues. Friendships and romances often flourish or wither based on the powerful inertia of initial positive or negative impressions. The more strongly we feel the glow of the halo, the more likely we are to interpret ambiguous behavior in a positive light, reinforcing the favorable image we have already constructed. Yet the halo effect is not purely positive. It has a darker twin, the horn effect. Just as positive traits can cause us to overestimate someone's overall goodness, negative traits can cause us to unfairly judge someone harshly across the board. A single perceived flaw, an awkward comment, a lapse in etiquette, an unfortunate appearance, can overshadow genuine strengths and virtues. The same cognitive machinery that magnifies the good can also magnify the bad, distorting our understanding and fueling misunderstanding, bias, and injustice. Recognizing the halo effect invites a greater humility in judgment. It reminds us that our assessments of others are often less about objective reality and more about the emotional and cognitive filters through which we view them. Awareness allows us to pause, to question our assumptions, and to seek a fuller, more nuanced picture of the people we encounter. It encourages us to separate traits rather than blend them indiscriminately, to evaluate each dimension independently rather than allowing one shining aspect to color the whole. In leadership, the halo effect can be both an asset and a trap. Charismatic leaders often benefit from the glow of the halo, as their confidence and vision inspire loyalty and trust. Yet, when leaders are idealized too heavily, their mistakes may be overlooked, their flaws minimized, until a dramatic failure brings the illusion crashing down. Wise leaders recognize the power of the halo effect and strive to build genuine credibility across domains, rather than relying solely on charisma or first impressions. They cultivate substance as well as style, knowing that real trust must be earned through consistency and integrity. The halo effect also teaches valuable lessons about personal growth. Understanding how first impressions and dominant traits influence perception can guide us in developing not just surface-level appeal, but deeper, more authentic virtues. It encourages self-awareness, recognizing how we are perceived, how we influence others, and where we may need to grow to align perception with reality. It invites us to nurture qualities such as kindness, humility, and reliability, knowing that these virtues, once seen, often illuminate the whole person in the eyes of others. At a broader social level, the halo effect underscores the importance of fairness and critical thinking. In systems where appearances can overshadow substance, whether in education, employment, or justice, biases fueled by the halo effect can perpetuate inequality and injustice. Building systems that emphasize objective evaluation, transparency, and multiple perspectives helps to counteract these biases, creating environments where individuals are judged more fairly and opportunities are distributed more justly. At a deeper philosophical level, the halo effect invites reflection on the nature of perception itself. It reminds us that reality is filtered through the lens of the mind, shaped not only by what we see, but by how we see. Beauty, charisma, and confidence are not merely attributes. They are catalysts that shape entire narratives in our minds. Understanding this opens the door to greater empathy for ourselves and for others. It allows us to forgive the flaws we discover once the halo fades, to accept the complexity of others, and to embrace the complexity within ourselves. In practical terms, mastering the awareness of the halo effect can improve our decision-making. In hiring, we can create structured interviews that focus on specific competencies rather than general impressions. In personal relationships, we can remain curious and attentive beyond first encounters, allowing people to reveal themselves more fully over time. In everyday interactions, we can resist the urge to quickly categorize and instead approach others with openness, patience, and a willingness to see beyond the glow or the shadow. Ultimately, the halo effect speaks to the yearning at the heart of human connection, the desire to see and be seen, to know and be known, to find coherence and meaning in the rich, complex tapestry of human character. It reminds us that while our minds seek simplicity, true understanding lies in embracing complexity. It invites us to move beyond the easy comfort of halos and horns, beyond the rush to judge or idealize, and into the deeper, more challenging, and infinitely more rewarding work of truly knowing one another. And so, the next time you find yourself enchanted by someone's charisma or disenchanted by a single flaw, pause and breathe. Remember the halo effect at work. Choose to look again, to look deeper, to see not just the light or the shadow, but the whole person standing before you, a fellow traveler in the messy, beautiful journey of being human. The framing effect. In the delicate architecture of human thought, few forces are as quietly influential as the framing effect. It is the phenomenon where the way information is presented, the frame, rather than the content itself, profoundly shapes how we perceive it, how we feel about it, and ultimately, what we decide to do. Even when the facts remain unchanged, their emotional resonance, their apparent urgency, and their persuasive power can shift dramatically depending on whether they are framed positively or negatively. Understanding the framing effect offers deep insight into how fragile and fluid human judgment can be, and how easily perception can be shaped not by what is said, but by how it is said. The framing effect reveals a simple truth. Human beings are not purely logical creatures. We are not neutral processors of information, weighing evidence with mechanical precision. Instead, our minds are highly sensitive to context, to emotion, to the subtle cues hidden in presentation. A glass described as half full invites optimism, satisfaction, even gratitude. The same glass described as half empty evokes a sense of loss, inadequacy, or concern. Nothing about the physical reality has changed, only the words have shifted. Yet the emotional world within us, the story we tell ourselves about that reality transforms completely. This bias is not a weakness, but a reflection of how human cognition evolved. In a complex and often uncertain world, the ability to make quick judgments based on emotional resonance rather than exhaustive analysis can be a survival advantage. Emotion adds urgency to thought, allowing for swift action. Frames, by triggering emotional responses, serve as shortcuts that help us navigate a sea of choices. Yet what was once adaptive can lead to distortions in a modern context, where the frames we encounter are often crafted not by nature, but by marketers, politicians, and persuaders seeking to shape our decisions. One of the most famous demonstrations of the framing effect comes from experiments in decision theory. In one study, participants were presented with a medical problem, a disease outbreak expected to kill 600 people. They were offered two programs. In the positive frame, Program A was described as saving 200 lives. Program B carried a 1/3 chance that all 600 would be saved and a 2/3 chance that no one would be saved. In the negative frame, Program A was described as resulting in 400 deaths. Program B remained the same. Although the outcomes were mathematically identical, participants overwhelmingly preferred Program A when framed positively and leaned toward the riskier Program B when framed negatively. The emotional weight of lives saved versus deaths caused shaped their choices more powerfully than the actual outcome. The implications of the framing effect ripple across every domain of human life. In health communication, the framing of information dramatically influences behavior. People are more likely to opt for a medical procedure described as having a 90% survival rate than one described as having a 10% mortality rate, even though the facts are identical. In marketing, consumers respond differently to a product advertised as 90% fat-free compared to one labeled 10% fat. In politics, public opinion shifts depending on whether an issue is framed around losses to be avoided or gains to be achieved. Understanding the framing effect empowers us to communicate more effectively. By carefully choosing the frame through which we present information, we can guide perception without altering the underlying facts. Leaders can inspire action by framing challenges as opportunities for growth rather than threats to stability. Educators can motivate learning by framing difficulties as steps on the path to mastery rather than signs of inadequacy. Parents can nurture resilience by framing setbacks as experiences to learn from rather than as failures to fear. Yet with this power comes ethical responsibility. Framing can be used to enlighten and encourage, but it can also be wielded to manipulate and deceive. By highlighting certain aspects of reality while downplaying others, frames can distort perceptions, fuel polarization, and exploit fears. Responsible framing demands honesty and respect for the autonomy of the audience. It requires that we frame reality in ways that serve not only our own goals, but also the truth and the well-being of those we seek to influence. Awareness of the framing effect also makes us more discerning thinkers. It invites us to pause when we feel a strong emotional reaction to how information is presented. Are we reacting to the facts themselves or to the way they have been framed? What alternative frames might reveal different facets of the same reality? By cultivating the habit of reframing, of looking at issues from multiple perspectives, we strengthen our critical thinking, deepen our empathy, and guard against manipulation. The framing effect also teaches humility. It reminds us that our perceptions, no matter how deeply felt, are shaped not only by the realities before us, but by the lenses through which we view them. Recognizing this opens the door to greater patience, greater tolerance, and a greater willingness to listen to others whose frames differ from our own. It softens certainty and creates space for dialogue, reflection, and growth. At a personal level, reframing can be a powerful tool for resilience and well-being. Life inevitably presents us with setbacks, losses, and hardships. How we frame these experiences dramatically shapes how we endure them, what we learn from them, and how we emerge on the other side. A failure can be framed as a dead end or as a stepping stone. A loss can be framed as pure pain or as an invitation to gratitude for what was once held. A challenge can be framed as a burden or as a calling. Reframing does not deny pain or struggle, but it reclaims agency, allowing us to craft meanings that empower rather than diminish us. In relationships, understanding the framing effect can foster deeper empathy. The stories others tell about their lives are shaped by their frames. When we recognize that a friend's despair or a partner's anger may arise not just from external circumstances, but from the frames through which they view those circumstances, we can listen more compassionately. We can help others and ourselves find frames that support healing, connection, and hope. In leadership, framing is essential for vision. Great leaders do not merely describe the present, they cast a vision of the future that frames current challenges within a narrative of purpose, meaning, and possibility. They help people see not just what is, but what could be. They understand that facts alone do not move hearts. It is the frame, the story, the vision that inspires action. At a philosophical level, the framing effect reflects a profound truth about human existence, that reality is not merely encountered, but interpreted. We live not in the raw facts of the world, but in the meanings we assign to them. Every experience is filtered, colored, and shaped by the frames we carry, whether inherited from culture, forged from experience, or chosen with intention. Ultimately, understanding the framing effect invites us to become architects of our own perception. We can choose frames that uplift rather than oppress, that invite growth rather than fear, that expand possibilities rather than close them. We can choose to frame our lives not as victims of circumstance, but as co-creators of meaning and purpose. And so, the next time you hear a message that stirs strong emotion, the next time you face a choice that feels fraught with urgency, pause and reflect. Look not only at the facts, but at the frame. Ask yourself, what is emphasized? What is hidden? What other frames might be possible? In that moment of reflection, you reclaim a measure of freedom, the freedom to see, to choose, and to live more consciously, more compassionately, and more wisely. Loss aversion. Beneath the surface of human decision-making, there runs a current deeper and more powerful than the simple desire for gain. It is the potent force of loss aversion, the psychological tendency to fear losses far more than we value equivalent gains. In countless experiments and everyday experiences alike, people demonstrate a striking asymmetry. The pain of losing something is sharper, heavier, and more enduring than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. Understanding loss aversion reveals much about how humans weigh risk and reward, how we make choices under uncertainty, and how influence can be shaped by emphasizing not just what stands to be gained, but what might be lost. The origins of loss aversion lie deep within our evolutionary history. For early humans, losses of food, shelter, allies could mean death. Gains, while desirable, did not carry the same existential urgency. This imbalance favored survival. Those who reacted more strongly to potential losses were more cautious, more protective, more likely to endure the hazards of an unpredictable world. Over time, the emotional circuitry that magnified loss became deeply wired into human psychology. Today, that ancient adaptation continues to shape behavior, often in ways we do not consciously recognize. The foundational research on loss aversion comes from the groundbreaking work of psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. In their prospect theory, they demonstrated that people value losses roughly twice as much as gains. In other words, losing $100 feels about twice as painful as gaining $100 feels pleasurable. This asymmetry explains why people are often risk-averse when facing potential gains, but risk-seeking when facing potential losses. It also explains the powerful motivational force of highlighting what people stand to lose rather than simply what they might gain. In marketing, loss aversion is skillfully harnessed through language and framing. Limited time offers, expiring discounts, and low stock alerts all play on the fear of missing out. Advertisements that emphasize what consumers risk losing by inaction rather than simply what they could gain by purchase tap into deeper motivational currents. A product might be framed not just as an opportunity to enhance life, but as a shield against missing out, falling behind, or losing comfort and status. The same principle drives loyalty programs that remind customers how close they are to losing their rewards, and insurance policies that stress protection against unforeseen losses rather than emphasizing the rarity of disasters. Loss aversion is equally influential in personal decision-making. People often hold on to investments that are losing value, reluctant to realize a loss, even when rational analysis suggests selling. Relationships are maintained beyond their healthy lifespan, fueled by the fear of losing shared history and comfort rather than the promise of future happiness. Even simple daily decisions, whether to stay in a job, to move to a new city, to end a subscription, are often governed more by what we fear giving up than by what we hope to gain. In leadership, understanding loss aversion can dramatically improve communication and motivation. When proposing a change, it is not enough to paint a rosy picture of the potential benefits. It is often more effective to clearly articulate the risks and losses associated with staying the same. People are far more likely to support innovation when they perceive that the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of change. Leaders who emphasize the dangers of complacency, the erosion of competitive advantage, or the slow decline of relevance awaken a deeper urgency than those who merely promise brighter horizons. Loss aversion also plays a critical role in negotiations. Skilled negotiators know that emphasizing what the other party stands to lose by walking away can be more persuasive than emphasizing what they stand to gain by agreement. The threat of losing a favorable deal, missing an opportunity, or damaging a relationship can nudge reluctant parties toward compromise more effectively than promises of future benefits. However, ethical negotiators use this knowledge with care, ensuring that appeals to loss aversion do not become manipulative or coercive. Yet, while loss aversion is a natural and often adaptive tendency, it can also lead to suboptimal outcomes. It can cause individuals and organizations to cling to outdated practices, resist beneficial risks, and settle for mediocrity rather than venturing into uncertainty. It can foster a defensive mindset, where avoiding loss becomes more important than pursuing growth. Awareness of loss aversion allows us to recognize when our fear of loss is serving us and when it is silently imprisoning us. Developing resilience to the paralyzing effects of loss aversion begins with reframing losses. Instead of viewing every loss as a failure, we can learn to see it as part of the natural ebb and flow of life. Every choice involves opportunity costs. Every path taken means others are left behind. Loss, in this sense, is not an aberration to be avoided at all costs, but a companion on the journey of growth and change. By normalizing loss and viewing it through the lens of learning and evolution, we loosen the grip that fear holds on our decisions. At a personal level, overcoming unhealthy loss aversion requires cultivating courage and trust. Courage to step into the unknown, to risk temporary discomfort for long-term fulfillment. Trust in our own resilience, in our ability to recover, adapt, and find new opportunities even when cherished things are lost. It is a practice of embracing impermanence, of recognizing that clinging too tightly to what we have can sometimes prevent us from reaching for what we need. In relationships, understanding loss aversion can foster compassion. Fear of loss underlies many defensive behaviors: jealousy, control, resistance to change. When we see these behaviors not as flaws but as expressions of deep-seated vulnerability, we can respond with empathy rather than anger. We can reassure rather than react, nurture security rather than stoke fear. Loss aversion also has profound implications for social and political dynamics. Messages that stoke fear of loss, of status, security, tradition, can powerfully mobilize groups. Politicians and activists alike often frame their appeals around what is at risk of being lost, rather than what stands to be gained. While this can drive engagement and action, it can also deepen divisions and entrench fear-based thinking if not tempered by hope, vision, and inclusive narratives. At a deeper philosophical level, loss aversion invites reflection on the nature of attachment. The more tightly we cling to possessions, identities, and outcomes, the more vulnerable we become to fear. Yet when we loosen our grip, when we ground ourselves not in transient externalities but in inner resilience and adaptability, we find a freedom that loss aversion cannot touch. We learn that while loss is inevitable, fear of loss need not be our master. Ultimately, understanding loss aversion offers not just a tool for influence, but a pathway to wisdom. It reminds us that fear, left unexamined, can quietly govern our lives. It challenges us to become conscious of the frames that shape our choices. It invites us to lead, to communicate, and to live in ways that honor both the reality of loss and the possibility of transcending it. And so, the next time you hesitate at a crossroads, caught between the safety of what you have and the promise of what could be, pause and breathe. Ask yourself, am I choosing from hope or from fear? Am I clinging to avoid loss or reaching to embrace growth? In that moment of reflection, you step beyond the unconscious pull of loss aversion and into the deeper freedom of conscious choice, a freedom born not of denying fear, but of moving forward despite it. The false consensus effect. In the hidden workings of human thought, there is a quiet, persistent illusion that shapes the way we perceive ourselves, others, and the world around us. It is known as the false consensus effect, the tendency to overestimate how much other people share our beliefs, values, preferences, and behaviors. We assume, often unconsciously, that our way of thinking is normal, widespread, and obvious, even when reality tells a different story. Understanding the false consensus effect not only reveals why misunderstandings and divisions arise so easily, but also shows how ideas can be framed to sound more normal or popular, leveraging our deep need for social belonging and validation. At its heart, the false consensus effect stems from a simple psychological truth. We are deeply social creatures. We draw comfort, security, and identity from feeling that we are part of a larger whole. Believing that our opinions are widely shared reassures us that we are not alone, that we are reasonable, and that we are right. This bias offers emotional protection, reinforcing self-esteem and reducing the uncomfortable tension that can arise when we face differences. It simplifies the world, allowing us to navigate complex social environments with a reassuring sense of common ground. The false consensus effect was first rigorously studied in the 1970s by social psychologist Lee Ross and his colleagues. In classic experiments, participants were asked to predict how others would behave in hypothetical situations, such as whether they would agree to wear a sandwich board promoting a cause. Those who agreed to the task assumed that most others would also agree. Those who refused assumed that most others would likewise refuse. In both cases, participants projected their own choices onto the broader population, revealing how deeply personal perspective colors our assumptions about consensus. One of the most fascinating aspects of the false consensus effect is that it operates even when we have little evidence. We infer consensus not from careful surveys or thorough questioning, but from our own feelings and from the social circles we inhabit. If our friends, colleagues, or favorite media sources echo our views, we are more likely to believe that everyone thinks as we do. The illusion is amplified by the echo chambers that naturally form around shared identities, interests, and values, reinforcing the sense that our perspectives are universal. The false consensus effect has profound consequences for communication, persuasion, and influence. When people believe that an idea is widely accepted, they are more likely to embrace it themselves. Framing an opinion or behavior as normal, popular, or what most people are doing taps into the deep human desire to conform to perceived social norms. Advertisers, politicians, and social movements use this strategy all the time, emphasizing the popularity or widespread acceptance of their positions to create a bandwagon effect. If everyone else is doing it, the reasoning goes, it must be good, right, or inevitable. Understanding the false consensus effect allows communicators to frame ideas in ways that maximize acceptance. Instead of presenting a new concept as radical or controversial, it can be introduced as part of a growing trend, as something that many people already support or most smart individuals recognize. By tapping into the natural human tendency to seek consensus, communicators can reduce resistance and increase openness, gently guiding audiences toward agreement without overt pressure. However, the false consensus effect is a double-edged sword. While it can be used strategically to frame ideas positively, it also blinds individuals and groups to the diversity of thought and experience that exists in the world. It fosters misunderstanding, polarization, and conflict. When we assume that our views are the default and others must be either ignorant, irrational, or malicious to disagree, dialogue breaks down. Recognizing the false consensus effect in ourselves invites humility, a reminder that our perspective, however deeply felt, is only one among many. In leadership and teamwork, awareness of the false consensus effect is critical. Leaders who assume that everyone shares their vision without soliciting feedback risk alienating those who see things differently. Team members who believe their opinions are widely held may be blindsided by dissent. Wise leaders foster environments where diverse views are actively sought and valued, counteracting the illusion of consensus by creating space for genuine dialogue and dissent. This not only strengthens decision-making, but also builds trust, resilience, and creativity within groups. At a personal level, understanding the false consensus effect can deepen empathy and connection. When we encounter someone who disagrees with us, we can pause and remember that their perspective is shaped by experiences, cultures, and values as real and valid as our own. Instead of reacting with defensiveness or dismissal, we can listen with curiosity, seeking to understand rather than to win. In doing so, we expand our own horizons, becoming more flexible, compassionate, and wise. The false consensus effect also sheds light on the phenomenon of social media polarization. Online, algorithms amplify our exposure to like-minded voices, creating echo chambers that reinforce the illusion that everyone thinks like we do. When dissenting opinions do surface, they often appear extreme or irrational, deepening divisions and eroding the capacity for nuanced dialogue. Recognizing this dynamic invites us to intentionally seek out diverse perspectives, to challenge our own assumptions, and to approach digital spaces with greater critical thinking and humility. Yet the false consensus effect is not inherently negative. It reflects a deep human yearning for connection and understanding, the desire to be part of something larger than ourselves. To belong to a shared reality is a source of strength and solidarity. The challenge lies not in eradicating this tendency, but in balancing it with awareness, openness, and a commitment to truth. Practically counteracting the false consensus effect involves cultivating habits of inquiry and reflection, asking ourselves questions like, how do I know that others agree? Or, what evidence supports my assumption? Can reveal the hidden biases that shape our thinking. Engaging in genuine dialogue with people from different backgrounds and perspectives broadens our understanding and weakens the illusion of universal agreement. Reading widely, listening deeply, and embracing intellectual humility all serve as antidotes to the seductive comfort of assumed consensus. At a broader societal level, building bridges across divides requires framing differences not as threats but as opportunities for growth. When we recognize that disagreement is natural, inevitable, and even healthy, we move beyond the simplistic narrative of us versus them. We can celebrate the richness of diverse perspectives while still seeking common ground. We can frame unity not as uniformity of thought, but as shared commitment to respectful engagement, curiosity, and co-creation. At a deeper philosophical level, the false consensus effect invites reflection on the nature of truth itself. Truth is not defined by majority opinion, nor is it invalidated by disagreement. Our perceptions, no matter how widespread, are always partial, always colored by context. Embracing this truth invites a kind of intellectual humility, a recognition that certainty is fleeting, that understanding is an ongoing journey, and that wisdom lies not in clinging to the illusion of consensus, but in the courage to explore the unknown together. Understanding the false consensus effect offers both a warning and an opportunity. It warns us against the dangers of complacency, insularity, and overconfidence. It reminds us that seeing the world only through our own lens impoverishes our understanding and narrows our horizons. But it also offers the opportunity to grow, to listen more deeply, to think more critically, to engage more compassionately. And so, the next time you find yourself thinking, "Everyone must agree with me," pause and smile. Recognize the gentle pull of the false consensus effect, then lean into curiosity. Ask, listen, explore. In doing so, you step beyond the comforting illusion of universal agreement and into the richer, more vibrant reality of a world full of difference, complexity, and infinite possibility. The name trick. In the intricate and often delicate art of human connection, there exists a simple yet profoundly powerful tool: the name. It is one of the most beautiful sounds a person can hear, not because of its melody, but because of its meaning. A name is more than just a label. It is a symbol of identity, a vessel of history, memory, and belonging. Using someone's name during conversation, the name trick, builds an invisible bridge between hearts. It sharpens attention, fosters trust, and deepens connection, often more effectively than 1,000 well-chosen words. Understanding and mastering the name trick offers a path to more authentic, resonant communication. At its core, the name trick works because it touches the fundamental human need to be seen, acknowledged, and valued. From our earliest moments of consciousness, our name represents our individuality. It is how we are called, known, and remembered. When someone uses our name, especially thoughtfully and warmly, it signals that we matter to them. It draws us closer, pulls us out of the noise of distraction, and invites us into genuine presence. It affirms, "You are not just another face in the crowd. I see you." Psychological studies have shown that hearing our own name activates unique regions in the brain associated with self-identity. Even in a sea of sounds, our mind reflexively tunes in to the sound of our name, a phenomenon known as the cocktail party effect. Amid the clamor of voices, music, and laughter at a gathering, the utterance of our name cuts through, pulling our attention instantly. This profound sensitivity to our own name reflects just how deeply it is woven into our consciousness. The practical application of the name trick in conversation is both subtle and powerful. Using someone's name at the beginning of an interaction sets a tone of respect and attentiveness. Sprinkling their name naturally throughout the conversation reinforces warmth and connection. Concluding a dialogue by using their name leaves a lasting impression of personal attention and care. Each use of the name, when done sincerely and without overuse, strengthens the invisible thread of rapport. In sales and negotiation, the name trick is a quietly effective technique. A salesperson who remembers and uses a customer's name respectfully creates a sense of personal attention that transcends transactional interaction. A negotiator who addresses their counterpart by name fosters a sense of mutual recognition and respect, softening adversarial edges and inviting collaboration. In customer service, the simple act of using a customer's name transforms a generic interaction into a personalized experience, often turning dissatisfaction into loyalty. Yet the name trick must be wielded with authenticity. Overusing someone's name or using it in a way that feels mechanical or manipulative can backfire. People are exquisitely sensitive to tone and intention. If the use of their name feels like a tactic rather than a genuine acknowledgement, It breeds distrust rather than rapport. The secret lies in balance and sincerity, using the name naturally, weaving it into conversation as a genuine sign of respect and presence. In leadership, the power of names is magnified. A leader who knows and uses the names of their team members communicates that each person matters. In large organizations, where individuals often feel lost among the many, a leader who remembers names and small details about people creates a culture of belonging. It sends the message, "You are not invisible here, you are known." Such leaders inspire loyalty, engagement, and trust far beyond what positional authority alone can command. The name trick also deepens personal relationships. In friendships, partnerships, and family connections, using a loved one's name during conversation can create moments of tenderness and affirmation. Calling someone by name when expressing gratitude, when offering comfort, or when sharing joy amplifies the emotional resonance of the moment. It roots the experience in a shared space of intimacy and recognition. Interestingly, the name trick also plays a role in conflict resolution. When emotions run high, using someone's name can ground the conversation, reminding both parties of their shared humanity. It softens confrontation, replacing anonymity with familiarity. A heartfelt "Listen, Sarah" carries a very different emotional weight than a cold, impersonal statement. Names bridge distance, pulling the conversation back toward connection even in the midst of disagreement. At a broader social level, the respectful use of names promotes inclusion and dignity. Learning and correctly pronouncing someone's name, especially when it reflects a different culture or language, is an act of honor. It signals willingness to embrace diversity, to extend respect across differences. It says, "Your identity matters enough for me to take the time to learn and remember." The name trick also teaches mindfulness in communication. It invites us to slow down, to pay closer attention, to truly see the person before us rather than rushing through interactions mechanically. It reminds us that every encounter is with a living, breathing individual, carrying their own dreams, struggles, and stories. Using a name is not just a conversational tactic, it is a practice of presence, of sacred attention to the unique being before us. In storytelling and teaching, the name trick can create intimacy with audiences. Addressing listeners by name when possible, or using names in examples and narratives, personalizes the message, making it more relatable and memorable. It turns abstract concepts into lived experiences, drawing listeners deeper into engagement and understanding. Even in self-reflection, names hold power. Using our own name gently in self-talk, "You can do this, David," "Stay strong, Maria," can foster self-compassion and resilience. It creates a sense of supportive distance, allowing us to coach ourselves through challenges with kindness and affirmation. Yet the deeper power of the name trick lies not just in the act of speaking a name, but in the spirit behind it. It is the spirit of reverence for the individual, the spirit of seeing and honoring the sacredness of each human life. When we use a name thoughtfully, we are not merely calling out across a void, we are reaching toward connection, toward community, toward love. At a philosophical level, the name trick reflects a profound truth about being human. To be named is to be recognized. To recognize another by name is to affirm their existence, their dignity, their belonging. In a world often marked by alienation and anonymity, the simple, sincere use of a name becomes a quiet act of resistance, a rebellion against the forces that would reduce us to numbers, roles, or stereotypes. It is a declaration: you are not forgotten, you are not overlooked, you are seen. In practical terms, mastering the name trick involves a few simple practices. Make it a habit to learn and remember names whenever possible. Repeat a new acquaintance's name naturally in conversation to anchor it in memory. Use names thoughtfully in emails, meetings, and casual interactions. Practice attentive listening so that the name is connected to the whole person, not just a label. And always, always approach the use of names with authenticity and respect, The name trick is not about cleverness or technique. It is about heart. It is about choosing to see, to honor, and to connect in a world that often rushes past the precious individuality of each person. It is about slowing down enough to call someone back into their own dignity through the simple gift of their name. And so, the next time you greet a friend, meet a stranger, or comfort a loved one, pause for a moment. Speak their name with warmth, with presence, with sincerity. Watch how their eyes brighten, how their posture shifts, how the space between you becomes just a little bit smaller, a little bit softer. In that simple moment, you will have touched something profound, the timeless, unspoken need we all carry, to be known, to be named, and to be loved. The contrast principle. Within the subtle realm of human influence, there exists a phenomenon as powerful as it is often invisible, the contrast principle. It is the idea that the way we perceive something is not based solely on its absolute qualities, but largely on how it compares to what came immediately before it. By exposing people to a dramatically different option first, whether better, worse, bigger, smaller, more expensive, or less desirable, the next option can seem more attractive, reasonable, or compelling by comparison. Understanding the contrast principle gives us profound insight into how easily perception is shaped not by reality alone, but by context, sequence, and expectation. At its core, the contrast principle operates on the relative nature of human judgment. We are creatures who rarely assess things in isolation. Instead, we judge value, beauty, cost, and quality through comparison. A product, a person, a proposal, none of these are evaluated purely on their intrinsic merits. They are seen through the lens of what came before. A house looks more affordable after touring an outrageously expensive mansion. A job offer feels more appealing after a grueling series of worse interviews. A meal tastes more satisfying when hunger has been sharpened by hours of fasting. Context creates meaning. Sequence shapes value. This principle was first formalized through experiments in psychology that demonstrated how preceding stimuli influence subsequent evaluations. If someone dips their hand first into ice-cold water, then into lukewarm water, the lukewarm water feels warm. But if the sequence is reversed, first warm, then lukewarm, the same lukewarm water feels cool. The physical reality of the water does not change, only the context does, and yet the perception shifts dramatically. This is the contrast principle at work, not in theory, but in the immediate experience of the body and mind. In the world of sales and negotiation, the contrast principle is a well-worn tool. A salesperson might first show a customer a high-end, expensive product, knowing full well that the customer is unlikely to buy it. The real goal is to make the mid-priced product that follows seem more reasonable, more attractive, even more affordable by comparison. By shifting the customer's reference point, the salesperson reframes value without changing the actual price of the item. What felt expensive a moment ago now feels like a bargain. The same principle applies in negotiations. A party might open with a bold, ambitious offer, one that they know will be rejected. But by setting the initial anchor high, they make subsequent, more moderate proposals feel reasonable. The first, extreme offer is not expected to succeed. Its purpose is to redefine the landscape of possibility, to make everything that follows seem more attractive and fair. The contrast principle also plays a subtle but powerful role in personal relationships. In dating, for instance, meeting someone who is emotionally unavailable or disrespectful can make the next person who is merely decent seem extraordinary. After enduring toxic friendships, even basic kindness can feel like rare treasure. Our past experiences frame our current expectations, altering how we perceive and value what comes next. This is why timing, sequence, and first impressions matter so deeply, not because they change reality, but because they change perception. At a societal level, the contrast principle explains why social and political attitudes can shift rapidly after exposure to extreme examples. A moderate policy may seem radical until contrasted with a more extreme alternative. Conversely, a previously unpalatable idea can become acceptable once framed as a reasonable middle ground between two extremes. This dynamic, often called the Overton window, demonstrates how strategic use of contrast can guide public opinion not by changing facts, but by changing frames. Understanding the contrast principle empowers us to influence more effectively. When presenting options, we can shape perception by carefully considering the sequence and context in which information is introduced. Leading with a dramatically different option, whether higher, lower, better, or worse, sets the stage for how the next option will be received. The key is to create enough distance between the options to trigger the contrast effect without making the difference feel manipulative or disingenuous. Yet, as with all tools of influence, the ethical use of the contrast principle matters deeply. It is one thing to guide perception with integrity, offering genuine value in a thoughtful way. It is another to deceive, to bait and switch, or to manipulate people into choices that do not serve their best interests. The art of influence must be grounded in respect for autonomy, truth, and mutual benefit. The contrast principle also invites reflection on how we are influenced in our own lives. By recognizing when contrast is shaping our judgments, we can step back and reassess. Am I valuing this option on its own merits, or because it follows something dramatically worse? Would I still choose this path if I encountered it first, without comparison? This kind of mindful questioning protects us from being unwittingly swayed by sequences that have been designed to nudge rather than to enlighten. At a personal level, the contrast principle teaches us about the importance of gratitude and perspective. Hardship, loss, and challenge, though painful, often sharpen our appreciation for simple joys. After illness, health feels more precious. After loneliness, connection feels more sacred. After failure, even small victories taste sweeter. Life, like perception, is framed by contrast. Embracing this truth allows us to savor moments more deeply, to find beauty not only in abundance, but in the recovery. In leadership, mastery of the contrast principle enhances communication and change management. Leaders who want to introduce innovation can first highlight the limitations of the current state, creating contrast that makes new proposals shine. Leaders seeking to build resilience can remind teams of past challenges overcome, framing present difficulties in the light of past triumphs. By consciously shaping the contrasts that define experience, leaders guide perception, not through force, but through thoughtful framing. The contrast principle also offers lessons in creativity and innovation. New ideas often gain traction not because they are perfect, but because they are framed against old paradigms that have become stale, ineffective, or limiting. Innovators understand that it is not enough to offer a better solution. They must first highlight the inadequacy of the status quo. Contrast creates the hunger for change. It fuels the desire for something new. At a philosophical level, the contrast principle mirrors deeper truths about human existence. Joy and sorrow, success and failure, love and loss, all are interwoven, each gaining meaning through contrast with the other. Without darkness, we could not recognize light. Without sorrow, joy would lose its savor. Without struggle, achievement would lose its sweetness. Life's richness comes not from constancy, but from the ebb and flow, the play of opposites that defines the human journey. Ultimately, understanding the contrast principle offers not just a tool for influence, but a way of seeing more deeply into the patterns of life. It invites us to become architects of perception, shaping how we and others experience the world through thoughtful attention to context, sequence, and frame. It teaches us that influence is not merely about what is offered, but how it is presented, and it reminds us that even in the quiet, unnoticed moments of comparison, the seeds of choice, meaning, and transformation are being sown. And so, the next time you are preparing to present an idea, to offer a choice, or to tell a story, pause and consider what contrasts will frame the experience. How can you shape perception not by changing the essence of what you offer, but by guiding the eyes and hearts of those you seek to reach? In that awareness lies the quiet power of the contrast principle, the power to influence not by force, but by the gentle art of shaping perception, one thoughtful frame at a time. The foot in the mouth technique. In the quiet art of persuasion, where the subtleties of conversation often matter more than the boldness of arguments, there exists a gentle and remarkably effective strategy known as the foot in the mouth technique. It is a method that begins not with demands or pitches, but with something far simpler and warmer: small talk about feelings. A simple question like, "How are you today?" opens the door to connection. It draws the other person into a small act of self-disclosure, and in doing so, it makes them more likely to comply with a subsequent request, softening their defenses and inviting cooperation without pressure. Understanding the foot in the mouth technique reveals how human interaction is as much about emotional exchange as it is about logic or negotiation. At the heart of the foot in the mouth technique lies a deep psychological truth. When people express themselves, even in small ways, they subtly commit to the social norms of connection, politeness, and reciprocity. Answering a simple question about how one is feeling, "I'm doing well, thanks," is more than just polite chatter. It is a small act of engagement. It signals openness. It acknowledges a social bond, however fleeting, and once that bond is acknowledged, it becomes harder to refuse a polite request that follows. The initial self-expression acts as a small, almost invisible bridge between strangers, preparing the ground for cooperation. The technique was formally studied in social psychology experiments that demonstrated how asking people about their well-being before making a request significantly increased compliance rates. Researchers found that people who had been asked, "How are you today?" and had responded positively were much more likely to agree to subsequent favors, whether donating to charity, participating in surveys, or assisting with tasks, than those who had been approached coldly or without that initial emotional engagement. The mere act of answering a small, friendly question created a subtle obligation to continue the social exchange positively. The effectiveness of the foot in the mouth technique is rooted in the power of consistency. When people publicly state that they are doing well or feeling positive, they are naturally inclined to behave in ways that are consistent with that expression. Saying "I'm good" or "I'm doing great" primes them to act helpfully, generously, or at least agreeably. It is uncomfortable to claim a positive emotional state and then behave coldly or selfishly immediately afterward. Thus, the initial expression nudges people toward maintaining a sense of warmth and responsiveness throughout the interaction. In practical terms, the foot in the mouth technique is disarmingly easy to use. Before making a request, whether seeking a sale, asking for assistance, or inviting cooperation, simply begin with a sincere question about the person's feelings or state. Listen attentively to their response, however brief. Acknowledge it warmly. Only then, once the small bond of connection has been formed, proceed with the main purpose of the interaction. The sequence matters. The initial question is not a formality to rush through, but a genuine invitation to connection, however momentary. In sales, this technique transforms cold calls into warmer conversations. A salesperson who opens with, "How's your day going?" and listens attentively to the answer sets a completely different tone than one who dives immediately into a pitch. In customer service, asking about a customer's day before addressing a complaint creates a human-to-human connection that can defuse tension. In fundraising, beginning with a simple check-in about feelings or recent experiences makes donors more receptive to requests. Yet the foot in the mouth technique must be used with authenticity. People are sensitive to insincerity. If the initial question feels forced, rushed, or purely manipulative, it can backfire, breeding resentment rather than rapport. The key is genuine interest. When you ask someone how they are doing, you must care enough to listen, even if briefly. True attention transforms a tactic into a gift, a small moment of human connection that brightens both lives, even if only for a minute. The foot in the mouth technique also has profound implications for leadership and teamwork. Leaders who take the time to check in on their team members' well-being before assigning tasks or addressing challenges foster a culture of empathy and trust. A simple, sincere "How are you holding up today?" reminds people that they are seen as individuals, not just as cogs in a machine. It nurtures loyalty, resilience, and collaboration far more effectively than commands or directives alone. In personal relationships, the principle behind the foot-in-the-mouth technique can deepen intimacy. Checking in with a loved one, genuinely asking how they are feeling before diving into logistics, plans, or problems, honors their humanity. It signals, "Your inner world matters to me." Over time, these small acts of emotional attunement build a foundation of trust, making larger conversations about needs, boundaries, or desires more fruitful and less fraught. The technique also reflects an important truth about influence, that persuasion is not fundamentally about argument, but about relationship. People are far more willing to listen, to agree, and to act when they feel connected to the person speaking. They are not persuaded by logic alone, but by the feeling of being respected, heard, and valued. The foot-in-the-mouth technique, in its gentle way, reminds us that influence flows from connection, not coercion. At a deeper psychological level, the foot-in-the-mouth technique taps into the norm of reciprocity. When someone shows interest in our feelings, we feel a natural impulse to respond positively. When someone listens to us, we want to listen in return. When someone acknowledges our humanity, we are more inclined to acknowledge theirs. These subtle exchanges create a dance of mutual respect and responsiveness that makes collaboration and compliance feel natural rather than forced. However, like all powerful techniques, the foot-in-the-mouth approach must be used ethically. Its goal should not be to manipulate others into unwanted actions, but to foster genuine engagement that makes cooperation easier and more pleasant. Used sincerely, it enhances communication and strengthens bonds. Used cynically, it risks eroding trust and damaging relationships. The heart behind the words matters as much as the words themselves. The foot-in-the-mouth technique also teaches us about the importance of small beginnings. Big outcomes often start with small openings, a smile, a question, a moment of attentiveness. In a fast-paced world that prizes efficiency and results, it is easy to overlook these small gestures. Yet they are the soil in which trust, influence, and collaboration grow. Mastery of communication begins not with grand speeches, but with humble, heartfelt exchange. At a philosophical level, the foot-in-the-mouth technique reflects a deeper truth about human nature. We are not machines exchanging data. We are beings of feeling, story, and connection. Our willingness to act, to cooperate, to trust, flows not from cold calculation but from the warmth of relationship. Even the simplest question, "How are you today?" can open a doorway into that shared human space, where influence is no longer about pushing or pulling, but about walking together. Practicing the foot-in-the-mouth technique in daily life is as much about mindset as it is about method. It requires slowing down, resisting the urge to rush into the main point, and honoring the person in front of you as an end in themselves, not merely a means to your goals. It invites presence, patience, and a spirit of genuine curiosity. And so, the next time you find yourself preparing to make a request, pause. Begin not with what you want, but with who they are. Ask, "How are you today?" Mean it. Listen. Allow the small magic of connection to unfold. In that simple act, you will have planted the seeds of trust, rapport, and cooperation, and you will have honored the deeper truth at the heart of all influence, that before people will move for you, they must first feel seen by you. The endowed progress effect. In the intricate world of human motivation, there is a quiet force that often goes unnoticed, yet powerfully shapes our drive to complete tasks. It is called the endowed progress effect. The phenomenon where people are more motivated to complete a task when they feel they have already made progress toward its completion. Even a small head start, an illusion of advancement, can ignite momentum, stir commitment, and transform a distant goal into an achievable reality. Understanding the endowed progress effect reveals profound truths about how progress, even perceived progress, can awaken perseverance and propel us forward. At its core, the endowed progress effect taps into the deep human preference for completion. We are naturally drawn to finish what we start. Incomplete projects, unfinished journeys, unresolved tasks, they linger in our minds, generating a subtle tension that calls for closure. When we are shown that we are already partway to the goal, even artificially, the drive to complete becomes stronger. The goal no longer feels like a mountain to climb from the base. It feels like a path we are already walking, a path that merely needs a few more steps. The phenomenon has been vividly demonstrated in psychological experiments. In one study, researchers handed out loyalty cards to coffee shop customers. Some customers received blank cards requiring 10 stamps to earn a free coffee. Others received cards with 12 stamp spaces, but 2 spaces were already marked as completed. Despite both groups needing to collect 10 stamps, those who were given the illusion of having already made progress, those 2 steps closer, completed their cards faster and more often. The small, initial endowment of progress made a profound difference in motivation and follow-through. The power of the endowed progress effect lies not in the actual effort saved, but in the perception of advancement. It reshapes the psychological distance to the goal. Rather than seeing the journey as something that begins at zero, individuals see themselves as already underway, already partially successful. This perceived momentum stirs a desire to continue, to build upon what has already been started, to avoid wasting the effort that has already been invested. In marketing and customer retention, the endowed progress effect is used with quiet brilliance. Loyalty programs, subscription milestones, and gamified rewards often begin by giving customers an artificial head start. Welcome, you've already earned 10 points. Or you're already halfway to your next reward. Such framing subtly increases engagement, boosting the likelihood that customers will continue participating until the reward is claimed. The sense of ownership over the progress, however small, fuels commitment and reduces abandonment. In education, the principle can be used to foster perseverance among students by highlighting the progress they have already made, how many assignments completed, how many credits earned. Teachers can sustain motivation through long and challenging learning journeys. When students perceive themselves as partway to mastery, rather than stuck at the beginning, they are more likely to push through difficulties, setbacks, and fatigue. The endowed progress effect also holds powerful lessons for personal goal setting. Large, intimidating goals often feel overwhelming because they seem to start from nothing. But by framing goals as continuations of past efforts, by recognizing and celebrating existing progress, motivation strengthens. A person trying to build healthier habits can be reminded, you've already taken important steps by starting today, creating a sense of motion that is easier to sustain. Progress tracking apps, fitness programs, and even self-help journals leverage this effect by constantly highlighting how far the individual has come, not just how far they have to go. Leadership, too, is profoundly enriched by understanding the endowed progress effect. Leaders who recognize and affirm small wins fuel the morale and momentum of their teams. Celebrating early successes, even symbolic ones, can galvanize group energy and focus. Acknowledging we've already completed the first phase of the project builds a sense of accomplishment and invites a collective surge toward the next milestones. In contrast, focusing solely on how much remains to be done can breed fatigue and discouragement. The endowed progress effect also reflects a deeper psychological truth about investment. When people perceive that they have already invested effort, time, or energy toward a goal, they are less willing to abandon it. The phenomenon connects closely with concepts like the sunk cost fallacy and commitment bias, where prior investment increases the perceived value of continuing. However, while those biases can sometimes lead to poor decisions, the endowed progress effect generally serves as a positive motivator, especially when it is used ethically and transparently to support meaningful progress. Ethical use of the endowed progress effect requires authenticity. Artificially inflating progress, making false promises, or manipulating perceptions can backfire when the truth becomes apparent. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. Thus, when using this principle in leadership, marketing, education, or personal development, the focus must remain on genuinely celebrating real progress, even if small, and reinforcing the individual's intrinsic agency and achievement. At a deeper level, the endowed progress effect invites reflection on the nature of perseverance itself. Progress is not a binary state of success or failure. It is a continuum, a journey marked by countless small steps. Recognizing and honoring partial progress fuels the emotional and psychological resources needed to continue. It teaches patience, resilience, and the art of sustaining effort over time. In relationships, a similar dynamic unfolds. Acknowledging the growth and progress made together, through challenges weathered, dreams pursued, conflicts resolved, strengthens bonds. It builds a shared sense of movement toward a common future, reminding both partners that they are not starting over with each new difficulty, but building on a foundation already laid with love and effort. The endowed progress effect also invites a reimagining of personal narrative. Rather than seeing ourselves as beginning anew with each endeavor, we can frame our lives as a continuous journey where every experience, every attempt, every lesson builds upon the last. Each moment of growth, however small, becomes part of a broader story of becoming. In this frame, setbacks are not failures but temporary pauses in an ongoing dance of progress. Practically, leveraging the endowed progress effect involves small but meaningful actions. When setting goals, break them into clear, achievable milestones and celebrate early wins. When guiding others, frame challenges in light of past successes. When motivating yourself, track and honor the steps already taken. Even if the ultimate goal feels distant, use visual progress trackers, journals, or simple verbal affirmations to make progress visible and emotionally salient. At a philosophical level, the endowed progress effect speaks to the human need for hope. Hope is not merely a passive feeling, it is an active engagement with possibility. Seeing ourselves as already underway, already partially succeeding, stokes the flame of hope. It transforms effort from a burden into a continuation of a meaningful journey. It reminds us that we are not stuck, not stagnant, not starting from nothing. We are always already in motion, already building. The endowed progress effect offers not just a tool for motivation, but a lens for living. It teaches us to honor beginnings, however small, to recognize and celebrate movement, even when the summit is still far away, to trust that each step taken, each effort made, each moment of persistence is part of a larger arc bending toward fulfillment. And so, the next time you find yourself or someone else facing a daunting task, pause and remember, you are already partway there, you have already started, you have already built momentum, however slight. Let that truth nourish your spirit, let it light your next step, for in the quiet acknowledgement of progress, no matter how humble, lies the unstoppable force of human perseverance. The Pique End Rule. In the subtle theater of human memory, the ways we recall experiences are shaped not by an even-handed summation of every moment, but by a few key emotional highlights. This phenomenon, known as the Pique End Rule, reveals that people judge experiences largely based on how they felt at the most intense moment, the peak, and how they felt at the conclusion, the end. The total duration, the average emotion throughout, and even the overall sequence of events often fade in importance. What remains, stamped deeply into memory, are the heights of joy or pain and the final emotional tone that closed the chapter. Understanding the Pique End Rule provides profound insight into how experiences are crafted, remembered, and evaluated, offering quiet strategies for shaping perception, influence, and meaning. At the heart of the peak end rule lies a fundamental truth about memory. It is not a perfect recording device. We do not replay experiences as complete films from beginning to end. Rather, we reconstruct them, stitching together fragments, and the most vivid stitches are sewn at the peaks and the endings. This cognitive shortcut helps us quickly summarize complex experiences, but it also leads to systematic distortions in how we evaluate and remember the past. The peak end rule was vividly demonstrated by psychologist Daniel Kahneman and his colleagues through experiments involving discomfort. In one study, participants were asked to place their hands in painfully cold water for 2 sessions. In one session, the water remained painfully cold throughout. In another, the session was slightly longer, but ended with the water becoming marginally warmer, still uncomfortable, but less so. Despite the second session being longer and including more total discomfort, participants overwhelmingly preferred it when asked which experience they would repeat. Their memory focused on the less painful end, not the overall sum of suffering. The peak of pain and the gentler ending shaped the story that memory carried forward. This principle extends far beyond physical sensations. It colors how we remember vacations, relationships, meetings, meals, and performances. A vacation filled with minor inconveniences but capped by a spectacular sunset may be remembered as wonderful. A smooth business meeting that ends with a tense argument may be remembered as unpleasant. A movie that drags at times but concludes with a powerful climax often leaves a stronger positive impression than a consistently good but unremarkable one. The emotional peak and the emotional end serve as bookmarks, defining the story that the mind will tell about the experience. Understanding the peak end rule allows us to become quiet architects of experience. When designing an event, a presentation, or even a simple interaction, we can focus attention not on making every moment perfect, but on creating powerful peaks and thoughtful endings. A speaker, for example, can structure a talk around a moving story or a powerful call to action at the end, knowing that the final moments will loom largest in memory. A host can plan a gathering to crescendo into a joyful moment, laughter, surprise, gratitude, before guests depart, ensuring the memory carried away is warm and bright. In customer service and business, the peak end rule is a vital guide. Customers often remember not the entire process, but the most intense emotional point, whether delight or frustration, and the feeling at the conclusion of the interaction. A difficult customer journey can be salvaged by a resolution that leaves the customer feeling cared for and respected. Conversely, a smooth process marred by a poor final interaction can tarnish the whole memory. Companies that attend carefully to these emotional touch points build loyalty not just through efficiency, but through emotional resonance. In personal relationships, the peak end rule offers wisdom for conflict resolution and connection. Disagreements and tensions are inevitable, but the way they peak and end shapes how they are remembered. A difficult conversation that culminates in mutual understanding and tenderness may be remembered as a turning point for good. A disagreement that ends harshly, even if mild overall, may linger as a scar. Choosing to end hard conversations with affirmations of love, shared laughter, or gestures of care can transform how those moments are encoded in memory. The peak end rule also illuminates the rhythms of self-reflection. Our memories of personal growth, achievement, and failure are not even chronicles of effort, but emotional narratives shaped by peaks and endings. A challenging project remembered fondly often had moments of triumph or fulfillment that peaked above the struggle, and it ended with a sense of completion or pride. Understanding this dynamic allows us to design our own journeys with more compassion, celebrating milestones, crafting meaningful closures, and savoring victories along the way. Yet the peak end rule carries cautions as well. It warns against judging entire experiences based on a few emotional flashes. A relationship filled with kindness but ending in conflict can be unfairly judged by its conclusion alone. A long journey of growth marred by a difficult final chapter may be remembered too harshly. Awareness of this bias invites a more balanced reflection, recognizing that the full tapestry of experience is richer and more complex than our memories' snapshots suggest. Practically, applying the peak end rule involves focusing not on smoothing every bump, but on designing powerful emotional moments. In teaching, it means creating moments of discovery or wonder, letting students end lessons feeling empowered or inspired. In healthcare, it means ensuring patients leave appointments feeling cared for, regardless of the procedures endured. In storytelling, it means crafting climaxes and resolutions that stir the soul, leaving echoes that linger long after the story is told. The peak end rule also invites a philosophy of living with intentional punctuation. How we end days, projects, seasons of life matters deeply. Choosing to close chapters with gratitude, celebration, or reflection shapes not only memory but identity. We become, in part, the stories we remember about ourselves, and by tending carefully to how experiences conclude, we shape those stories toward hope, resilience, and meaning. At a societal level, understanding the peak end rule can enhance public experiences, civic events, ceremonies, collective rituals. Designing public experiences to crescendo in communal peaks of joy, reflection, or unity, and to conclude with affirmations of shared values and visions, builds collective memory and cohesion. In a fragmented world, shared peaks and endings can become anchors of belonging and hope. At a deeper philosophical level, the peak end rule reflects the broader human tendency to find and create meaning through narrative. We do not merely exist through time, we make stories of our existence. We remember not the totality of days, but the highlights and endings that structure the stories we tell ourselves and each other. In this, the human heart reveals its nature, not as a cold accountant of minutes and hours, but as a tender weaver of moments and meaning. Ultimately, the peak end rule teaches us that in shaping experiences, our own and others, we need not strive for perfection at every step. Instead, we are called to pay special attention to the moments of intensity and to the moments of closure, to build peaks of joy, awe, connection, and triumph, to end with grace, love, gratitude, and dignity. In these choices, we sculpt the memories that will guide, comfort, and inspire long after the experiences themselves have passed. And so, the next time you find yourself crafting an experience, whether a conversation, a journey, a project, or a simple day, pause and wonder, where will the peak be? How will it end? Shape those moments with care, knowing that they will echo longer and louder in memory than all the moments in between. In doing so, you not only shape perception, you honor the sacred human instinct to find meaning, beauty, and story in the fleeting passages of time.